In the late 1980s, Kid Icarus was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and nobody knew about it until 2006. At least, that's how it always felt following the conversation online. Back on May 11th of 2006, during one of the most epic moments in Nintendo history, we got a reveal trailer for Super Smash Bros. Brawl for the Nintendo Wii. Now, obviously, probably the biggest headliner from this trailer was the inclusion of Solid Snake, but millions upon millions of people around the world also noticed a young fighter with wings that would become a staple for Smash Bros. Going forward. And while there were undoubtedly many people that knew exactly who Pit was, everybody else flooded the message boards to learn about the inclusion of the protagonists from Kid Icarus. And I mean, in fairness, this wasn't exactly uncommon. Even though this was only the third game in the franchise, the Super Smash Bros. Series always brought some of the lesser known characters up to the forefront. Like, I'm not trying to imply that Earthbound or Fire Emblem or even Ice Climbers were unknown entities, but they definitely gained a lot more popularity after their characters were included in Smash Bros. And strictly speaking about Kid Icarus, the timeline of the releases kind of proves this point. The first game comes out on the NES in the late 1980s, the second game launches in 1991 on the Game Boy, but it wasn't until 2012 where Kid Icarus Uprising graced the Nintendo 3DS. And it almost immediately developed a massive cult following, as well as some unfortunate controversial takes in regards almost entirely to the control scheme. You see, Kid Icarus Uprising, as many of you likely know, was developed by Project Sora. Project Sora was founded by a former employee of HAL Laboratory, and obviously that employee was none other than Masahiro Sakurai, the king of Smash Bros. And Kirby. A lot of Kirby. Now, anybody that's followed Masahiro Sakurai knows that he is very particular about the way his games play. When Kirby Air Riders came to the Nintendo Switch 2, you'd think this was just a very simple title. It's got maybe one or two buttons that you gotta push through most of it, and on the surface to many it just looks like a simple kart racer. Well, this very simple title, that on the surface looks like it's nothing more than Mario Kart for babies, ended up getting two separate videos where Masahiro Sakurai delved deep into the mechanics of these titles, and each of those videos was approaching an hour long. And this is obviously because of the attention to detail that Masahiro Sakurai gives into his games, and more specifically into the control of those titles. So when it came to Kid Icarus Uprising, as easy as it would be to make a simple rail shooter where you're just sliding your joystick across the screen and firing on enemies, that's not really what the purpose of this title was. It was meant to be a game to showcase the touchscreen of the Nintendo 3DS, as well as the actual 3D itself, obviously. Something that I don't think people talk about enough is just how good the depth perception on the 3DS is specifically for this title. Playing this game with a 3D panel is just a whole different experience. But obviously the controls with the touchscreen is the major discussion here, because as simple as it would have been to just make an easy rail shooter where you slide the stylus across the touchscreen, effectively making an entire adventure feel like a tech demo for the Nintendo 3DS, that is just simply not Masahiro Sakurai's style. Instead, what was put into this title was a control scheme that was probably a little too difficult to get into, but extremely enjoyable to master. In the typical classic Nintendo fashion from that era specifically, the enjoyment of the software wasn't just about the game, but it was also in how you played it. And the novelty of this control scheme was so unique that most people needed a stand to properly enjoy it. And that's of course because you had to hold the 3DS in one hand while using the stylus to aim with the other, making it a title which can be enjoyed a ton if you're patient, but also very easy to walk away from if you just want a regular game. Now, part of the limitation of this game is the fact that you didn't have a second joystick you could use on the Nintendo 3DS when it launched. Even if you decided to go out and buy a circle pad extension, or even if you bought one of the later models of the 3DS that has the nub on it, the game still remained with a consistent control scheme. There was effectively no way to play this title in what many considered the ideal way to play it, with twin-stick controls. And because the game was never really designed around that type of control scheme, even when people started to emulate the title, using the right joystick for aiming just never quite felt that natural. No, the best way to play large portions of this game for a very long time, at least in my opinion, would have been with a keyboard and mouse, using the keyboard to move Pit around on the screen, while aiming for your targets with a mouse. But that obviously limits you. Now you're stuck playing this game on a desk, And at the end of the day, this is a portable game, and it's designed around being a portable game. So unless you're very passionate about playing it, it's not necessarily the game that you might want to play on your desk. And beyond that, this control scheme with the keyboard and mouse really only works best when you're flying in the air. Because something that is typically ignored during the discussions around Kid Icarus is the fact that most of this game does not actually take place flying around in the air. Now, pretty much every single stage starts you off with a segment where you're flying around in the air as if it's just a typical rail shooter, but after you get through that flying segment, you're brought down to the ground. And the game effectively turns into a third-person shooter. And creatively, they actually make that part of the lore of the title. Pit can't fly. In the Kid Icarus manga, Pit states that his wings don't work because he's a fledgling. But in this game specifically, Palutena's comment says that his wings do not work right. So in the case of Kid Icarus Uprising, all of the segments that take place in the air is Pit being offered powers so that he can fly. They're helping him move around in the sky, it's not his own power. But they can only do it for a limited amount of time. And once that time runs out, that's when Pit needs to land and go through the ground segments of this game. And obviously this brings a whole other plethora of obstacles that you have to go through. Not just in the gameplay, but in the actual controls. You're on the ground playing a third-person shooter, but you only have one joystick. And this isn't 1999. Nobody wants to play a game in 2012 that controls like GoldenEye. So of course, Sakurai's brilliant mind was once again put into work about how you can properly utilize the touchscreen to aim with Pit while he's on the ground. And similar to the flight controls of Kid Icarus Uprising, this is something that does take a little bit of time to get used to, but anybody that has mastered the controls of Kid Icarus Uprising, anybody that's gone for full completion or at least attempted to go through full completion of this title will tell you that the control scheme is dang near perfect. But there is a very large and vocal number of people that jumped into this title, were able to adapt to the controls in the sky, because that was simple enough, you're just moving a joystick around to fly around while aiming with the touchscreen. But once Pit dropped down to the ground and the controls actually somehow became slightly more complicated, they were never able to fully get over it while playing on the 3DS. Now, if you look at the default controls for this title, you can kind of see the issue here. When you're up in the air, it shows three options. Move Pit with the left joystick, use any of these buttons to fire, and aim with the touchscreen. But once you move over to the land sections, it adds a few more things. You still move around with Pit on the joystick, except you're not simply moving him around the screen, you're traversing the ground. And you know how it goes in typical Smash Bros. Fashion, if you kind of just jolt that joystick forward, you can dash in those directions. The attack buttons remain the same, but now if you're closer to an enemy, you will tap the button repeatedly for a melee combo, or if you're dashing towards an enemy, you can do a dash hit, or if you're next to an object, you can interact with it, or you can use that button to use the item that you're carrying. So the attack button becomes context sensitive. Again, think back to the Kirby Air Ride franchise where a single button somehow does everything depending on what you're also doing when you push that button. But I would say that's still not the most egregious part of the controls. You also have the additional powers that you can use while playing through the game using the D-pad, with the left and right button cycling through the powers and the down button actually allowing you to use it. By pressing the R button, you can quickly turn the camera and put it behind you. And then as all of this is going on, you still have your right hand dedicated to holding the stylus and aiming with the touchscreen. Now, arguably, this would change the entire game, so I'm not suggesting this to be a solution, but if, hypothetically, the ground sections of these games were also on rail, or if this game was strictly a linear hallway tunnel type game that only focused on moving your character forwards and never towards the right or left or backwards, then these additional controls might actually be a lot more welcoming for people that are not looking to get too deep into the complications of this title. But the problem is, in addition to all of this, the game is more of like an open, free-flowing type of title. Sometimes there will be an enemy towards your left, sometimes they'll be behind you, sometimes you'll have to quickly turn around. And you're trying to do all of this while using your stylus on the touchscreen. So Sakurai had a solution for this. You quickly swipe the stylus across the screen and your character will immediately shift over into a different direction. And quite frankly, this is a critical part of the game if you're looking for perfection. Right? If you're somebody that's trying to beat the title on the hardest difficulty and you're going for full completion, you gotta master this. But fortunately, the difficulty of this game scales pretty well. In fact, every time you lose a life, the difficulty will go down a little bit, making sure that even a casual player can get through this title and enjoy it without feeling too frustrated or overwhelmed either by the difficulty or from the controls. But this also means that when a casual player is trying to run through this title and they're sliding their stylus across the screen, it's very easy for them to accidentally swipe a little bit too quickly and completely shift the camera into an angle they weren't looking for. it ends up making the game feel very disorienting. And that could be very frustrating because really all you're trying to do while playing this game is move around on the ground and aim at the enemies. You're not trying to do anything fancy. Like I said, on the ground sections, it just feels like it's supposed to be a third-person shooter. So once again, this will put you in a situation where those that are the most passionate about this title find all these little intricate details of the control scheme to be an absolute necessity, while the casual audience can very easily be put off by the complications of what this otherwise could be a very simple title. Now, fortunately for many people, Sakurai puts the controls of this game completely in the player's hand, allowing you multiple control options, while also providing the ability to fully customize your controls. With the one exception to this being the inability to use the second joystick to aim while moving with the left one. I guess I really wanted to make sure people were not playing this game with two joysticks. But hey, with the flexibility on the table here, it does make it a little bit easier for those that really want to get into this title but don't like the stylus controls to find a way to enjoy the game regardless. It won't be the best way to fully complete a title, but if you're looking for just a casual run-through of the story, it can more than suffice. And I do kind of want to delve deeper into the different types of control schemes of this game, because, well, this is a deep dive. And the way this game controls is an iconic part of its legacy. In fact, off the main menu, when you go into the options, the very first thing that you can click on is the controls. And even when you do click on that, it breaks it down into multiple sections. And first off is the controller configuration. Step 1 allows you to choose how to control Pit. The default obviously is with the circle pad, but you have the option of moving him around with A, B, X, Y. And naturally, this is because many people cannot use a stylus with their right hands. Because, well, they're left-handed. So if you're using your weak hand trying to aim around with a stylus, it could be pretty cumbersome. And fortunately, while it's not perfect, there is an alternative here where you can use the face buttons instead of the joystick to move Pit around. Now for step 2 of the controller configuration, you can choose how to move your reticle around. The touch screen will always be an option, but you also have the ability to set it so that either the joystick or the D-pad also moves the reticle. This can be useful because if you're using the face buttons on the right side of the screen to move Pit around, you can aim with the left thumb, either with the joystick or the D-pad, which kind of feels like inverse thumbstick controls, albeit with a limitation of not having joysticks. So effectively, you'd be moving around and strafing with your right thumb while aiming with your left thumb. It's not natural by any means, but hey, my brother's left-handed, and every time we play a shooter, he does switch his controls around, so for him, this would be probably pretty natural. But it's obviously not ideal regardless. Now, fortunately, you can set it up so that you're using the thumbstick to move Pit around and using A, B, and X and Y to move the reticle around, so you're basically getting that typical third-person shooter control scheme. But obviously, the big issue here is that the joystick is what's moving your character, whereas the face buttons are what's aiming. And you really would rather have a joystick doing the aiming instead of face buttons. So even if you can get close to feeling natural, there are still limitations that always creep up regardless of what control scheme you choose. But credit to the developers, at the very least, they do give you an option to adjust all of the sensitivities as well. So if you are using those button controls, you can change both the horizontal and the vertical sensitivity to make it a little bit easier to get the cursor around the screen in the way that you would like. And as kind of a failsafe, just in case it remains a little bit too complicated for many people, there is the option to turn on and off the homing shots as well as aim assist and auto fire. It really feels like Sakurai is giving people as much of a chance as they can to enjoy this game, even if they can't get used to the default controls. Now, I'll be completely honest, my preference for playing this game is just with the default controls. I think part of the fun of Kid Icarus Uprising is using the stylus to aim. But I will make this very clear, I suck at this game. I always have. I managed to beat this title pretty close to when it actually launched. I don't remember exactly what year I bought this game, but it was during the 3DS generation. But I enjoyed this game for the 3DS visuals. I enjoyed it a lot more during the flying segments rather than the ground segments, and I liked it because of the uniqueness that the control scheme offered. Something I did not care too much for was all of the additional RPG elements, which I know is absurd, nor did I really care too much about fully completing the title or beating it on the hardest difficulty. I think I've sit somewhere in the middle, maybe even closer towards the casual angle of things. Most casual players of this game that probably could not get through it because they were sick of the default controls might view me as somebody that's a little bit too passionate about this title, but I'm not even remotely passionate enough for those that find this game to be a cult classic to consider one of their own. After all, I just said that I don't care too much about playing this game on the hardest difficulty or going for full completion, or that I don't really care too much about the RPG elements, and those are very key factors here. I am somebody that believes that this game is worth getting through one time, start to end, with whatever difficulty and whatever control scheme you find that'll get you through the adventure. Because it is a fun adventure, and it has many enjoyable moments, and it has many relatable and enjoyable characters in said story. That alone makes this game at least worth playing through once in whatever control scheme that you set up. And I think it is worth going out of your way to figure out which control scheme suits you best just to play through this adventure one time. Anything more than that is an added bonus. Mastery of this title should be done by those that enjoy it as much as they do. I don't knock them for it. And I think that's part of the brilliance of what Sakurai made here. It's a game that could be played through and enjoyed whether you are a casual coming in for a one-time visitation, or you're somebody that's playing this game over a decade later looking for ultimate mastery of the title. You can be the individual that runs through this entire game and looks for every single weapon that you can collect, and then jumps into the screen in between levels and combines various different weapons so you can create the ultimate tool to use at your disposal to take down the enemies. You can go through the game and crack all of these eggs if you want. You could set up multiple different power builds for Pit so that he can be perfect in this situation or excellent in this type of level, buffing and nerfing him as you go through the game so you can reach ultimate perfection. Or you could just casually be like, I like the way this weapon looks. And in both instances, you'll probably have a very good time with this title. Although admittedly, I do like the weapon combination more than all of the other elements that are outside the gameplay in this game, just because, well, it kind of feels like Kirby, and I like when Sakurai does stuff like this. Plus, it is pretty easy to figure out how to get a stronger weapon without wasting too much time. In any case, if you happen to be somebody that's intimidated by the thought of playing this game, just know that it is something that you can get through and enjoy, whether it's on original hardware or via emulation. It might seem like it's overcomplicated on the surface, and in a lot of ways it kind of is, but this is a game that is well worth a casual playthrough regardless of how you set up the controls on the 3DS. And if you're somebody that has full mastery of this game and you think that I'm a casual, well, you probably have already made up your mind about the type of Kid Icarus player that I am. But I will say that in today's day and age, it might be one of the best times to get into this title. There are so many different ways to enjoy this. You obviously have the option of using original hardware. You can play it on an Android emulation device that'll feel very similar to how it natively felt on the 3DS, except the game will look a lot better. You can emulate it using keyboard and mouse. You can emulate it trying to screw around with twin stick controls on a joystick. Or you can do it the way that I did it for this playthrough, using the trackpads that are built into the Steam controller and likewise playing it with that control scheme on a Steam Deck. Now I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through how I set up the controls with the Steam controller. I do have a video on my alt channel Emudine where I go through that and I will link it in the description for you. But thanks to the fact that Sakurai made the controls so customizable, I was able to set the game up so that when I was flying in the air I was moving around with the left joystick while aiming with the trackpad, which felt so natural and perfect for this game. And then when I dropped down to the ground, I was simply able to just run around like it was a regular third-person shooter, moving around with the left joystick while aiming with the right. And personally, I think if you're somebody that's trying to get into this game and you're not interested in touch screens, or you're not interested in using a stylus, and you don't want to have to try to use the right joystick to aim while going through the flying sections, the control scheme that I set up might be the best way to experience this game in the current year. But of course, my control scheme will not take you towards mastery of this title. I genuinely believe that can only be done if you're playing the game with the original controls that Sakurai had set up. But if you're looking for a casual playthrough of Kid Icarus Uprising and you happen to have a Steam controller on hand, this very well might be the best way to experience the game today. It's how I did it for this video, and I thought it was a ton of fun. And like I said, you can check out this video over on Emudine if you want to see how I set everything up so that I can get to that control style. But look, I'm like 20 minutes into this video yet, and all I've talked about is controls. That can't be the only thing worth talking about this game, can it? Of course not. Because hitting behind this novel, gimmicky title is one of the most enjoyable stories in any Nintendo game you'll ever actually play. And, well, I mean, in fairness, it's a Nintendo game, so stories aren't exactly the highlight typically, but genuinely, there's a sense of attachment that comes into almost each and every one of the characters that are in this title. And the fact that most of it is done by simple dialogue on the screen that pops up with these little pixel PNGs makes me appreciate it that much more. Pit has such a lovable naivety around him. The way he interacts with Palutena, and really every other character in the game as well, put me in a position where I was hoping that he would succeed not only for my sake, but for his sake. Anytime his back was up against the wall, or a different enemy began to surface, I wanted to see what kind of fourth walls will be broken, because that's done a bit in this game, as well as what type of interactions and what kind of conversations he would have with the various other characters. There was so much charm in the dialogue in this game that it's hard to imagine that that's not what the key talking point of this title is. I'm serious, most people mention Kid Icarus Uprising and the first conversation that comes up is the controls. It should be the character building, it should be the actual dialogue. The passion of not only the characters, but the developers that made these characters as lively, relatable, and lovable as they are. And again, this is all done on a 240p screen of the 3DS, with text bubbles. In order to appreciate the story of this game, the voice acting had to be perfect, and I think they got pretty close to it. The atmosphere on this tiny title, that again is meant to be played on a dinky little screen in front of you, not on a 4K monitor, makes the game feel a lot larger than it actually is. And the atmosphere is only compounded in its perfection by a soundtrack that was intricately integrated into this amazing adventure. I love this game. I think it should be obvious by now. And I love it as a casual. I can only imagine how much more this game is loved by those that were willing to put in the endless amount of hours that it takes not only to fully complete it, but to fully perfect the experience. Now that being said, without waffling around too much more, I think it's time to jump into the actual adventure. Obviously, this is a game that's loosely based around Greek mythology, so many of the characters might actually be recognizable. Pit, or the title is known as Kid Icarus, is loosely based on Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun, and that story represents Pit's optimistic personality. He serves the goddess of light Palutena, against the goddess of darkness, Medusa, who has returned to destroy humanity. But as you move through the adventure, you find out that she was brought in by Hades, the lord of the underworld. And as you move through the adventure, you'll find recognizable faces like the god of the oceans Poseidon, as well as the goddess of calamity Pandora. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because this game is divided up into 25 main story chapters, and chapter 1 throws you right into the fun. I gotta say, I've always loved the way this game started. Palutena gives Pit a very quick tutorial, and then you're thrown right into the action. It's kind of funny too because it's a recording of an in-game cutscene, so when you're playing on original hardware, it's consistent with how the game is going to look once you start playing, but when you're emulating anytime these cutscenes come up, you'll notice a pretty big jump in the visuals once you go to the actual gameplay. And then it's like right off the bat, very exciting, you just get thrown right in. Chapter 1 titled The Return of Palutena. Pit apologizes for keeping her waiting, and then you just get going. As you play, you got a chance to start off getting used to the controls, but more importantly, over on the bottom screen, that's when the dialogue starts, with Palutena giving you the context of the story, highlighting Medusa's return right before she pops right up in front of Pit. Now mind you, Medusa suggests that she's been gone and trapped for 25 years, and that's because at the time of this game's release, it had been 25 years since you defeated Medusa on the NES. And I don't know, the whole intro sequence is just really fun. You're getting through there, everything's exciting, the music is loud and bombastic, the dialogue between the characters, learning how to control everything, and then the smooth transitions from Pit being in the sky while heading towards the ground, all the while Palutena is letting him know that he needs to just focus on the battle and she'll take care of routing him. And crucially, she highlights that she can only maintain his wings and the ability to fly for only about 5 minutes, while Pit highlights that he is embarrassed to be an angel that can't fly. And really, this whole segment is all there just to kind of give you a feel for what the game is going to be like as you run through it. I remember being surprised by how large this game felt, even though, effectively, it was being played on such a small device. Hearing the people's cheers as Pit came to come and help them as they're in battle against the dark forces of Medusa, and Pit so emphatically suggesting that they are celebrating the return of Palutena. And just as you start to enjoy it and get the hang of the controls, you're dropped down to the ground for your first land section. And I think this was very abrupt. Others might feel differently about it, but I think early on in the game, when you're just kind of getting used to all the flying controls and how fun they can be, as well as the views as you're fluttering around through the skies and enjoying the 3D if you have the slider turned up, it can feel like a bit of a rug pull in this early section at least, especially because you immediately slide into another tutorial that teaches you about the different types of attacks on the ground, whether they be the charge shot, the melee hits, or even how to dash. There's also typically a loading screen when you're shifting from the air sections to the land segments, which definitely can feel like momentum stoppers, but really it's the gameplay more than anything else that feels like a slowdown in momentum. When you're up in the sky, everything is just moving so quickly, you get a chance to fire at enemies, and if you don't hit them, they're just gonna disappear. When you drop down to the ground, it really starts to feel like a much slower game. And as a result, the land segments, which in my opinion are less enjoyable than the air segments, end up taking up more time than I would like. Fortunately, the dialogue does keep you a bit more engaged. Palutena reminds Pit that he needs to destroy as many monsters as possible in order to help protect the townspeople, while at the same time providing hints for the player about how to control their angel. Throughout various stages in the game, you'll also notice some intensity gates. These are gates that usually have alternate routes and some kind of goodie hidden inside there, but you'll only be able to access them if you're playing at the highest intensity, which basically means turn up the difficulty if you want to enjoy it. And just as players very quickly learn how to maneuver around the stage with Pit in the early air section of the stage, this opening area gives you a chance to learn how to move Pit around in the ground sections. But eventually the sky will turn dark red, there will be a loud menacing noise in the background, and Palutena will tell Pit that Medusa has unleashed an evil beast in the Colosseum, meaning it's time for Pit to progress and head inside. And sure enough, once Pit does make it inside the Colosseum, what awaits him is a fight against the Twin Fellows, the underworld's faithful watchdog. And, it's pretty cool. It's also easy. You'll be strafing a lot while aiming on the ferocious beast, and after a short amount of time and keeping your defenses up, you will defeat said monster. And finally, with a thump of his chest, Pit will look towards Medusa out into the distance and warn her that her days of darkness are numbered. Prepare to meet the light, he says. And yeah, I just kind of like everything about the first chapter. It really sets the vibe for how the game is going to feel. Not only in the way things are controlled, but also in the way that the game is going to feel as you run through it. And the fact that Pit ends up the stage and he's just looking straight into Medusa and telling her, hey, it's all over for her, followed immediately by Palutena kind of reeling him in and letting him know that, this is only the first step, we should take it a bit slower, helps cement the dynamic between these two lovable characters before you head towards Chapter 2. Titled Magnus and the Dark Lord. And once again, you're very quickly thrown directly into a flying segment, with Pit commenting on the poor weather, and Palutena suggesting that they must ignore the weather and continue along and defeat the Dark Lord. And of course, Pit, as rambunctious as ever, comments on the hilarity that the phrase Dark Lord has been done to death already. Now, the Dark Lord Gaul happens to be working for Medusa, and this evil army of monsters is coming from his castle. And as such, Pit points out that if this is a Dark Lord, he won't have some low-level minions. What he needs here is a brave hero. And then he starts to break the fourth wall, asking Palutena if they're dealing with a mini-boss or a final boss or what the situation is. And it's all just like this background dialogue that's happening as you're flying through the air and aiming at these monsters that are coming up on your rail shooting screen, really making the whole experience just feel like a non-stop treat. Especially because Pit says some very dumb things like he hopes the Dark Lord is hungry for a hot plate of punishment. Yeah, he's just full of these dumb little quips that I absolutely adore. As you fly through the stage, you're facing a barrage of enemies. You also have to carefully dodge Pit and actually worry about what's attacking him for once. And that's because lightning will cover the screen as well as enemies that will charge towards you while swinging out their blades. Where in the first stage you felt like most of it was trying to get used to aiming and hitting the characters that you were targeting, throughout this stage not only are you focused on the offense, but you also need to be careful and watch your defense. Finally, Palutena takes Pit all the way underground, offering Pit a chance to take on more and more baddies before happening upon a battlefield of humans going against the dark forces. And unfortunately for Pit, despite him wanting to drop down to help the enemies out, Palutena just does not have the power to help him fly for long enough. So they need to abandon the humans, even though they clearly need Pit's help. And you can see this bothering Pit. He wants to help them more directly, but Palutena reminds him if they head into the Dark Lord's castle and defeat him, it will force his army to retreat, which fittingly rejuvenates Pit's will to fight, transitioning you, the player, down into the next ground segment. Now, in the Dark World Castle, it's not exactly a labyrinth. You're not going to get lost over here, especially because there are guidance arrows that you technically could turn off in the options, although I don't know why you would. But running through this castle does give you a little bit of a scope in the ground segments of this game. It's very much linear, but there are multiple little areas where you can kind of veer off and search to see what's available. And through many of the segments along this game, you are going to have to defeat all of the enemies in an area in order to advance to the next portion. Honestly, this is a very big reason why I prefer the twin stick style controls via emulator, obviously, on the ground battle sections, because this is effectively kind of like more of an open world type of area instead of just a linear hallway, so it just makes the game a lot easier to get through without having to fumble around with the stylus on the touchscreen. As you head through the stage, you'll find random treasure chests, you'll encounter different types of enemies, some will be better to defeat at close range while others will more or less necessitate you keep your distance. And with every new enemy, you'll get a feel for how to interact with them when they make their reappearances. I should point out there is a massive variety of enemies here. I don't know if any of them really stuck out to me as super memorable by any means. Like, for me they all just kind of blend in, to be honest. But their appearances and animations do provide a lot of character, making them very enjoyable as a whole. But the highlight of this stage, at least for me, as you advance through this level, you eventually run into a human. And he's just one of those generic Herculean heroes. Reminds me of some of the best anime characters that I enjoyed. And it just took one cutscene to make me love this character. After fighting off a slew of monsters with his giant sword, he looks over and sees Pit and says, "I didn't expect to see an angel here. I hope this doesn't mean I've kicked the bucket." Now this guy is named Magnus, and as Palutena points out, he's taking on the underworld army by himself and surviving, suggesting that Pit should absolutely help him. And the combination of these two just honestly feels like a very stereotypical anime duo. You could replace the two of them with Luffy and Zoro, and I feel like it would perfectly work out. And perhaps that's why I enjoyed their dynamic so much. The one downside to all of this is that they're not together for the entire game. But at the very least, as you run through this stage, the two of them catch each other up to speed and both head towards the Dark Lord so they can take him on, with the understanding that Magnus is in this for the reward, and that Pit is here to be a hero. And it's kind of cool because now as you run through the rest of the stage, taking on more new enemies and dropping down or deep into the underground, you got a buddy with you, Magnus, and he's really strong. And Palutena highlights that since he is a human, he's clearly driven by desire, and whether or not he has morals is completely fine by her. Really highlighting that when it comes to these types of conflicts, sometimes everything can be a means to an end. But it is kind of funny because while initially Palutena is just kind of taking a liking to using this human to do her everyday bidding, Magnus tells Pit to let her know that she is sleeping on the job and she needs to wake up a bit and help save his people, causing her to completely shift her tone and call the human a jerk. And the duo just continue along this pathway through the castle, working their way up a narrow path through multiple levels and minor waves of enemies until they finally make it to their fight against the Dark Lord, where a battle between the three of them immediately ensues. What's funny is it seems like the Dark Lord and Magnus have had encounters in the past, with the Dark Lord more or less making fun of Magnus because he had to show up with support, that being Pit. And it's interesting because even Palutena is surprised that these two know each other, which really highlights that there's a lot more to Magnus than meets the eye. But of course the battle continues on and the two defeat said Dark Lord, and what's weird is that when the Dark Lord collapses, deep at the core beneath all of that armor is a human, something that Pit had no idea about, and he feels uncomfortable. And it takes Palutena reminding him that he shouldn't feel bad because he just saved a whole lot of other people by defeating this enemy, by defeating this girl that clearly means a lot to Magnus. And you could see it in the way that Magnus reacts after defeating her, down on one knee watching over her unconscious body. And just as Palutena reassures Pit that the girl still has life in her, it's time for her to regroup with Pit to continue along their journey against Palutena and head towards Chapter 3. Starting off in Chapter 3, we're sitting up in the sky because Medusa has brought the forces up to their realm. Her forces are invading Skyworld. This is a direct reaction to Pit taking down the Dark Lord Gao. Being overwhelmed by the number of forces, Pit and Palutena agree that the best idea is to go after the commander. But the commander of these forces is Hudra. And as Pit points out, it's the same Hudra from the classic game. The Hudra flies around in the sky and it has 3 heads. This gives Pit a chance to take down the 3-headed Hudra, but as Palutena quickly points out, the Hudra can actually regenerate its heads. As you all know, you cut off 1 head of the Hudra, and 2 will grow in its place. This leads to Pit nosediving down into the land, seeing the Hudra off into the distance next to the coast, and that gives us a chance to land and run through the city of the destroyed castle, heading through these narrow linear pathways and defeating all the enemies along the way, while really getting to take in the visuals of the destruction. I know I'm playing this on an emulator right now, but on original hardware, these destroyed cities with the fire and the smoke in the background really help in setting the tone with the 3D visuals. It's not bad on a flat 2D screen either, but it definitely could be a little bit better on the 3DS. Anyway, so the plan here is for Palutena to give Pit a gift, This gift is meant to bait the heads of the Hydru towards Pit. Unbeknownst to Pit, it's a monster pheromone, which makes for some pretty enjoyable moments, like the head of the Hydru straight up hitting on Pit, asking him if he did something with his hair and letting him know that he looks very attractive. And this obviously puts you in a quick battle on the ground against the first head of the Hydru. Once it's defeated, you follow the linear pathway, taking down more enemies, get a chance to regenerate some of your health if need be, and strangely enough, you'll also run into some Metroids. Yeah, they're in this game too. Although they're not technically Metroids, but close enough. Anyway, after taking down 2 of the heads, you'll finally make it over towards the coast, where the third Hydru had actually grown back its body. And I actually struggled with this fight. I'm pretty sure this is one of the few moments of the game where you'd actually be much better off playing with a stylus, just because you have to quickly attack the fireballs that the Hydru is shooting at you, and it's not as easy to get the cursor to line up exactly where it needs to be. Or something about the hitbox fell off, and it might be an issue with the emulation, I'm not sure. But you do have to worry about your defenses quite a bit on this one, and whenever the Hydru shoots out these fireballs that are just floating in the sky, shooting them enough will lure it over onto the land, and that gives you a chance to just unload on the enemy. And once it's all defeated, during its death animation, the Hydru will actually compliment Pit. It'll note how far he's come and say that he's proud of him. And I don't know if it's meant to be taken this way, but I took it as more of a reflection on how much the game and the encounters between Pit and him have evolved since they're first encountered back on the NES. Kinda nice. Even Pit points out that he's not used to bosses being so nice to him. But that does complete Chapter 3 for us and allows us to move on to Chapter 4, The Reaper's Line of Sight. In a dark and gloomy sky, Pit takes off the next onslaught of enemies. Pit quickly asks Palutena what the mission is this time, and she quickly reminds him of the Reapers of the Underworld. And just like last time, we get a little clip of the old enemies from the NES era. Palutena notes that the Reapers have a fortress near the entrance to the Underworld in Reaper Valley. And as Pit makes a few funny remarks about how relieved he is that they don't need to go anywhere near those Reapers, Palutena notes that Pandora, the goddess of disaster and calamity, and a commander of Medusa's underworld army, may actually be in that fortress. Or rather, the route to get to her goes through that fortress, because she believes that there's a force in the Reaper Fortress that is obscuring the labyrinth that Pandora exists in's location. And again, in just the type of humor that I love about this game, Palutena mentions that she cannot see the location of Pandora's labyrinth because of a botched laser eye surgery. But regardless of what the reasoning is, it's time for Pit and Palutena to head towards the fortress. And there's just an onslaught of enemies over here. A whole bunch of lasers pointing towards Pit means that he's going to have to completely reroute the direction that he's going, heading between dark and narrow canyons and facing off against just so many enemies, as well as having to avoid the terrain as he makes his way through this. And of course, as the luck would have it, there's even a windstorm that slows him down. And all of this is happening because he needs to stay out of the Reaper's line of sight. And everything from the underworld is just getting more powerful, including the Reapers, which causes Palutena to point out that it's a sign of just how much stronger Medusa has gotten, because her army and her forces have gotten stronger as well. But regardless of what is thrown at Pit, he beelines it directly towards the fortress to continue his mission in the ground section. Now, from a gameplay perspective, the difficulty does kick up a little bit over here. The Reapers can genuinely be a challenge to avoid, especially on the higher difficulties. I also love the aura of this fortress. It's really like a haunted mansion. There are also some elements like rail grinding segments. It's not quite Sonic the Hedgehog level of rail grinding, but it does mix the gameplay up just enough to make it interesting. And if that's not interesting enough for you, well, they get to turn into an eggplant. Yeah, there's a whole enemy here whose magic is turning you into an eggplant. I pointed out that this game was weird, right? I don't know if I said that or not, but there is some weird stuff in this game. Anyway, as you go through this fortress, it's filled with booby traps, hidden routes, jump pads, reapers, everything that you'd expect. Eventually, you'll make it to a rail grinding segment where you need to shoot a specific target as you move up the rails in order to extend the rail so that you can continue to move upwards. This is one of the few moments in the ground segment where I did find it very useful to use the touchpad of the Steam controller, just because it did make it a little bit easier to aim as I was moving along the rails. And eventually, waiting for you in the depths of the fortress is the Great Reaper, a boss fight. And the main focus here, aside from dodging its many attacks, is to get to high ground and aim for its eye until all of its health is depleted. Which leads Pit to let Palutena know that even though he almost died, he's having a lot of fun with her, which prompts her to cheekily reply that he needs to make some friends. But that's the end of the chapter, and now we've found the route to head towards Pandora's Labyrinth. And Chapter 5 starts off just like that. A space pocket opens up and Pit immediately flies through it. And basically the flying segment here is putting you through all of these different types of transitions, apparent tunnels that are between dimensions, to head towards the twisted, or as Palutena calls her, the unhinged Pandora, the goddess of calamity. And I know I've made comments like this before, but this whole segment over here, while it still does a pretty good job playing tricks on your eyes in the 2D space, it's nothing compared to how this looks in original hardware. Pandora's labyrinth is bright and colorful, but it all just feels like a giant optical illusion, like you're looking through a magic eye or a stereogram. I mean, as far as you, the player, is concerned, it's all on autopilot anyway. You're just flying around and shooting the enemies regardless of the backgrounds. But the bright and color abstract nature of the stage does make it stand out a little bit. Honestly, it feels like it could have been ripped out of a game from the NES era, like the trench run in Star Wars, for example. But yeah, as Pit flies through this stage, he keeps running into dead ends that don't look like they should be a dead end, prompting Palutena to guide him to the best of her ability. And in some moments, it even gives you an option to choose whether you want to go left or right, a rarity for the flying segments in this game. But that's not all there is to the trickery of Pandora. Suddenly you'll go through a tunnel and you'll be out in the sky, with the green grass and the beautiful blue water below you with the mountains off into the distance, and it all seems so real, as Pit points out. But it's part of the labyrinth of deceit, because eventually Pit's back inside and he's dodging some columns that are all blocking his way before he ends up in outer space. And then finally, after going through a long narrow tunnel, he gets to land on the ground of the labyrinth. And it pretty much looks the same as it did as you were flying through it, only this time you get to walk through everything and enjoy the trickery from a closer perspective. And this is a proper labyrinth. There will be multiple segments with various doors that you can choose to go through, and sometimes you'll get hit, sometimes you'll face off against an enemy, sometimes you'll have to run through a tunnel as fast as you can, sometimes you'll keep running towards the door and the wall will just keep moving back as you head towards it, before finally you have to make a quick turnaround and hope you don't get crushed around the turn. And the whole walls opening and closing thing just becomes a bit of a challenge as you make your way across various routes. Now eventually you do make it towards a vehicle section, which is kind of fun to play around in, only because there is an actual obstacle course for you to follow over here as you defeat the enemies. And Pandora makes an appearance and points out that she built this area to practice her driving, which naturally prompts Pit to ask how she drives if she has no hands. After that, you do get to a little platforming segment where you have to run through a tunnel that's rotating. I'm not particularly a fan of any platforming in this game just because of how sudden and abrupt Pit's movements can be on the ground, so this can be annoying if you're looking for a perfect run, but otherwise it's pretty easy to get through even if you fall off a couple times. And then it's just kind of more of the same stuff, except it gets more challenging. Doors and walls moving away from you as you walk towards them, platforms over bottomless pits that you need to carefully traverse around, and some added context to the narrative. Pit asks Palutena to refresh his memory about what they're doing in this location, and she points out that Pandora has the Mirror of Truth, making her Medusa's most valuable commander, because the Mirror of Truth makes a copy of whatever stands before it. It copies whatever is in your heart and creates beings identical in nature. So what Pandora possesses is a way to create monsters on a catastrophic scale, and it's a very big reason as to why Medusa's underworld forces are as large as they are this time around. Large in numbers, that is. And things kind of get existential over here. Palutena wants Pit to destroy the mirror, but he asks if the mirror copies the reflections of the soul as well, or just the body. He wants to know if these are sentient beings they're going after, and Palutena points out that that is indeed a good question, and says that we should ask Pandora, which of course brings Pandora forward to point out that this is not Ask Auntie Pandora hour. She has no interest in revealing all of her secrets. Now there's another annoying segment over here that's made unnecessarily more difficult just because of how sensitive Pit's movements on the ground are. Specifically in this case, the ground is invisible, and by shooting downwards ahead of you, you can make it appear. I did find that it was much easier to go a lot slower and defeat enemies before I moved towards them in this case, but it does bother me how quickly Pit tends to jolt forward in these segments. And admittedly, some of that is due to how I changed the controls around, but I remember even playing on the control stick on the 3DS, I did find these segments to be very annoying. It's like Pit just always wants to sprint forward if you move the joystick. But anyway, once you do make it through the segment, you finally get to Pandora. The underling of Medusa is floating before Pit, and it's time for her to atone for her crimes. And it's about at what you'd expect by this point in time, running in circles, avoiding her attacks, shooting her off in the distance, and pretty quickly into the battle, Pandora actually brings forward the Mirror of Truth, which naively causes Pit to charge directly towards the mirror. And that's exactly what Pandora wanted, heading straight to the mirror with a flying jump kick. Through the Mirror of Truth, a new being is born, a reflection of the light and bright Pit, the birth of his counterpart, Dark Pit. And the funny thing is, while Pandora's trying to be all smug about how she has this new being that's her servant now, he quickly brushes off the goddess of calamity because he does not plan on serving her. And it's a realization for Pit and Palutena that maybe the creation of Dark Pit was Pandora's plan all along. Regardless, the goddess of calamity is defeated, and Dark Pit quickly blindsides Pit with a kick straight to the gut, before running into and absorbing the power of Pandora to make sure that it doesn't go to waste, which allows him to fly off into the distance. And as Palutena points out, he has Pandora's powers, which means he could be allied with Medusa, and they need to follow him, marking the end of the chapter. Which brings us straight into Chapter 6, Dark Pit. And they waste no time here. You get out into the sky and you're chasing Dark Pit. The moment is intense, both because of the windstorms around you as well as the conversations between Pit and Dark Pit. Discussions about who is the actual copy and what makes a copy. And then with impeccable timing, Medusa jumps into the conversation. She attempts to convince Dark Pit to become one of her own, adding on that it would be a bonus if he could just defeat Pit and get rid of him. But Dark Pit seems to think that she's mistaken. He says that he will defeat Pit, but only after he defeats her. So it creates a fun little dynamic here, where you think that Dark Pit is one of the enemies, except really it's more of a gray area. He definitely wants to be powerful, seems to have his own goals, and he does apparently want to finish off Medusa, but he has no interest in aligning with Pit either. So it makes for a unique dynamic with this new character in the picture. In fact, even Pit and Medusa start to talk about how bizarre this whole situation is. In Medusa's mind, she thinks that his allegiance should be to the underworld army because the Mirror of Truth is what created Dark Pit. But there is a thought that maybe Pit was able to destroy the mirror and crack it before the copy was complete. Which means you have a character that's created that's fundamentally wicked and destructive, as Palutena puts it, but he's not working for the underworld. Therefore, Palutena is convinced that they need to destroy Dark Pit because he is manifested from Pit's dark side. And Pit, who does not seem to fully understand the entire situation, at the very least agrees that Palutena must understand it better than him. Their dialogue continues, however, and they begin to discuss the enemies that they are facing, noting that, hypothetically speaking, since the Mirror of Truth was destroyed, the onslaught from Medusa's underworld army should be thinning out a bit. And hypothetically that should be true, but something seems off about them. However, before they can delve deeper into that plot, Palutena suggests that they need to focus more on Dark Pit. He is the more imminent threat at this time. Now mind you, all of this dialogue is happening as you're running through a flying segment, which I don't really have much to add about this specific stage. Obviously things are getting harder now, and the visuals, for me at least, are about as enjoyable now as they've been all game. But I do tend to enjoy the fact that the narrative and the dialogue and everything's happening in the background as you're playing through the title. It does make it a bit disappointing that not all of this is happening through cutscenes, especially because some of these conversations are either really good, or even integral to the plot in some cases, but I like that the narrative doesn't take focus away from the actual game, because the game in and of itself is very arcadey. And I like that it sits at the forefront with minimal cutscenes, so these story beats that are happening during gameplay are really more of an added bonus for those that want to have a keen ear as they're playing. I mean, even as I'm describing this whole situation, there's a conversation between Pit, Dark Pit, Medusa, and Palutena. And it's good dialogue, but it's fine to ignore it if you don't care and easy to listen to as you run through the title. In any case, chasing after Dark Pit eventually leads Pit down into an area of ruins where he can land and begin the ground section. And while the entirety of the flying section involved chasing after Dark Pit, in this case you're simply just trying to find him. And this is also where Palutena refers to him as Pit 2, which becomes the adopted name for the character by the goddess and Pit 1. Now the ruins here do have a rustic vibe to them, and the level will have multiple routes for you to take, each with its own enemies and challenges along the way. And the goal really is very simple. You're looking for Dark Pit, with underworld forces blocking your path as you search for him. Eventually you'll run into him. He'll be shooting you with his bow from far away. And it doesn't really become a full-on boss battle just yet. You shoot him a few times, he gets knocked down, he flies away, and then you just search for him again. Eventually you get to the part where you get to ride what's known as a churrobot. Oh, these things are fun. They're super strong and they're very easy to control with the twin sticks. More enjoyable than the other vehicles in my opinion. Kind of feel like a Gundam. Every time they pop out, I just like to unload on all the enemies around me. And it's no different here. You give Pit a bunch of damage, he'll fly off, and you just gotta continue to search for him. Eventually, there will be rail grinds that you can climb up that'll take you up towards the sky, where there will be a set of platforms awaiting for you for the actual boss fight against Dark Pit. And it's about what you'd expect, that two of them are going at it, both verbally and physically. Dark Pit has little to no respect for Pit, and it's primarily because he views Pit as nothing more than a pawn, someone that doesn't act for himself, and only listens to whatever Palutena commands. Whereas Pit views Dark Pit as someone who is arrogant, and acts only for himself and nobody else. It's a typical dynamic, nothing really surprising. It's your Sonic and Shadow combination, your Goku and Vegeta. But what makes it a bit more interesting is the fact that Dark Pit is created from Pit, which means hypothetically Pit does have the ability to become Dark Pit. And likewise, Dark Pit has the ability to become Pit. It's just more natural for them to lean in towards the direction that they currently are. But anyway, once he's defeated, Dark Pit suggests that he went easy on Pit and flies off into the distance, while Palutena says there's no need to chase him because he is weak right now, won't be able to fly for very long, and they need to focus on Medusa. And that moves us straight into Chapter 7, the Seafloor Palace, which takes place over the desert skies. And the target now for Palutena and Pit is to head towards Thanatos, the god of death, which Palutena reminds Pit that back in the 80s, Thanatos took the form of a snake on Medusa's head. Now, Thanatos not only possesses a key to the underworld, which makes him very valuable, but he's also leading Medusa's invasion of the sea. And since his base is in the Seafloor Palace, it means it's time for Pit to hold his breath. That's actually what Palutena suggests, but obviously it freaks Pit out, and she tells him to watch and learn and witness the true power of the Goddess of Light. And then she straight up splits the sea, like just popped out of some old religious text. It's actually really cool. I still remember genuinely being surprised at this moment, especially because you're immediately attacked by Metroids, who in this case actually fit in very well because they look like jellyfish. And I know I've said this a bunch, but on original hardware, these moments are some of the best that the game has to offer. I mean, the visuals just really pop out at you, and with the 3D slider turned all the way up, it makes it all that much more interesting. And just as Pit continues to glaze Palutena about how phenomenal she is and amazing she is for being able to split the sea, Poseidon comes forward and says that it was actually him that did it, and she was just humorously trying to take credit for it in front of Pit. And obviously Poseidon is helping because he wants to get rid of Thanatos from the sea. I actually did die a few times in these segments, by the way. Like, I lost all my health. The way I played through the game is that I just continued to up the difficulty every time I finished a stage. As I was getting adjusted to the Steam controller, in the first few levels I was usually starting off around the 3 intensity, but I think I was mostly hovering around 5 or 6 by the time I got to the midpoint of the game, and that continued to the end. And it was not uncommon for me to lose at least 1 or 2 lives during every stage. The challenge is there. There were many moments where I kind of would get stuck in an area and have to repeat a challenge over and over again, but this game is definitely not a walk in the park unless you want to throw it on the lowest difficulty and just fly through it with ease. And for those that have been looking for mastery over the last 15 years, I think they definitely got to enjoy the challenge. In any case, eventually you do make it to the palace and head inside for the land segment. More new enemies appear, most of which will offer a decent challenge, and of course Thanatos joins the conversation, notifying the duo that he now goes by Thanatos, and the extra H is for amazing. God, I love this game. So obviously the goal now is to head through the palace, defeat the enemies along the way, open up various pathways so you can make it towards where Thanatos is waiting. He has the key to the underworld even though he denies it. And according to Palutena, this is basically Medusa's right-hand commander, even if Pit seems to wonder why a character like this is her second in command. Now, eventually you do make it to a rail grinding segment, and unlike some of the previous ones, this one is actually like the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. There are 3 different rails and you'll be jumping between them, and naturally going through enemies and obstacles along the way. And at the very end of it, there are enemies that are just waiting to destroy you, one of which has suction power that might make Kirby jealous. The next 3 areas that you're going to be running through have iced off floors, so it adds a hint of slipperiness to your traversal. And then there's these treasure chests that are typically filled with collectibles, only these ones have legs and they're actually enemies, so that's a fun little surprise. But heading towards the center of this palace where Thanatos awaits does offer many challenges because there are just so many enemies along the way. However, what I found to be the most annoying part was this segment over here where you're meant to stay on this platform as it goes around. And it's not because it's hard by any means, it's because the control on here is annoying as hell. Once again, I don't think this is strictly because I'm not playing on original hardware, because I remember even on original hardware, I did have obnoxious moments like this as well. But it definitely is exasperated a little bit because of our unique control scheme. Honestly, I even went into the settings over here and changed it back so that it was original control so that I can use the joystick to move Pit around, and I still lost a handful of lives while trying to run through it. I think I just kind of decided to stop moving around and take the hits. I'd rather lose health than fall off the platform anyway. It must have taken me about 10 minutes just to get through this, to be honest. And then once I finally did get through it, I changed my controls back. But like I said, even with the controller adjustments so that it was more similar to how it was done on original hardware, I still found this segment to be very annoying. And even back when I played this on the original 3DS many years ago, I recall thinking that all of the areas with platforms that sat over bottomless pits were the worst of the game. It could be a skill issue, but I found others online complaining about it too, so it can't be just me. But anyway, you eventually make it to the boss fight against Thanatos. He takes a few different forms during the fight, one of which is a bat, the other one is a pot of some sort. It's the same idea, however, you're just going to be running in circles, dodging, and keeping your reticle on him with the best of your ability as his health dwindles down. Eventually, he will turn into a bunch of weapons, specifically a handful of spears with a sword in the middle of them. You'll probably take a few hits with this one, but once you do defeat the weapons, he'll go into his original form, and that's your chance to finish him off. And with the God of Death defeated, the key to the underworld sits comfortably in Pit's hand, meaning it is time for our hero to head towards Chapter 8. Not the underworld, the space pirate ship. Yeah, this even confuses Pit. You'd think this is where they would head towards the underworld, but instead, they're heading towards a pirate ship. So Palutena reminds Pit of the weapons that he used to destroy Medusa many years ago. The mirror shield, the arrow of light, and the wings of Pegasus. And after Medusa was defeated back on the NES days, those items were hidden in case of an emergency, so they wouldn't get stolen. And they were hidden amongst the constellations. But space pirates. Yeah, like pirates in space. They went around and did their looting and got a hold of those treasures. And of course, the Underworld Army has discovered this as well. So today's mission is to raid the pirate ship and retrieve the 3 sacred treasures, especially before the Underworld Army gets to them first. And as such, Palutena blasts Pit straight up into outer space, where the brunt of this air segment takes place out in the cosmos. Flying amongst the stars, maneuvering between constellations, and eventually finding the pirate ship, which starts to hightail it out of there, but obviously we pick up speed with Palutena, and notice that the space pirate ship is under attack by the underworld, which means the treasures are still on there. And it's just a very high-speed section at the end of this level, massive commotion and mayhem everywhere, and if you survive through it just long enough, you'll be able to land onto the ship. But it is an abrupt landing, because things are going fast, even to the point where Palutena apologizes to Pit for the landing. Now, if you have a keen eye and you actually pay attention to what it is you're shooting, you'll notice that many of the enemies do look a bit different over here. And it's because they are not the underworld forces. Rather, they are the pirates. And as Palutena points out, they could actually be tougher than the underworld forces themselves. And you do kind of notice it to an extent. If I might use Halo as a comparison, just because I've been playing that recently, if many of the enemies we were facing before were similar to the grunts, these guys over here that look like kabutops remind me a bit of the elites. And there are different colors and variations of them with different types of weapons. From a gameplay angle, the only thing that really changes that much is your health drops down a lot quicker, and the enemies do take a few more hits to go down. I should point out that hitting up on the D-pad does put you into first-person view, and I'm only pointing that out now because I completely forgot about it, and this was the level where I tested it out in. It's not bad, although it does kind of limit your vision a little bit, so I do prefer playing with the third-person view, but it makes the aiming just a little bit easier if you are zoomed in. In any case, as you pass through the ship, eventually a hole will break through the side and the Underworld Army will be attempting to commandeer the pirate ship. Everybody really wants those treasures. And eventually when you start making towards the vaults that hold the constellations, there's a realization by Palutena that the treasures are not there, which means that the pirate captain must be wearing them. And so Pit has to make his way up the vault, fending off underworld forces and pirates for that matter, before eventually making it outside on a beautiful path that surrounds the ship that, as Pit puts it, has a view that looks like a postcard. This angle over here really kind of highlights just how big this ship is. Prior to that, you may have not noticed because you were chasing it while in the sky or running through it during the land segment, but here walking alongside of it, you really get the feel for how big it can be. Once you make it down inside the ship, you'll have to take on an onslaught of enemies while hitting switches that open and close various doors, and then eventually you can make your way back outside again and work your way upwards to get to the next entry point. And then finally, a very long rail grinding segment will take you all around the ship, allowing you to destroy all the enemies you can. And at the very end of it, after you take on a bunch of enemies that take a lot more hits to get damaged, you go up an elevator and you get to the boss fight. At first there's this little guy over here and you think that he's the enemy, but then nope, up pops a kraken. A space kraken, to be more specific. He'll slam down a bunch of his tentacles, and every time one of them gets slammed down, that's your chance to unwind on them. You gotta be quick on your feet, there's a lot of dodging involved over here. There are multiple tentacles and you can't see them all at once, but there is an indicator on the side of the screen that will point out which direction you might be getting hit from, and that'll help you be aware about which tentacle is about to slam down. Once you take down all the tentacles, eventually the Kraken's head will pop upwards. You have to carefully dodge and avoid as many of its attacks as possible, while at the same time unloading onto its mouth. Its hits will be strong and the timing of your dodges are important, but as you persevere you'll eventually take down the Kraken, and the ship will go down with it, leaving behind a treasure chest that contains the 3 sacred treasures, allowing Pit to grab them and move on to the next chapter. We have the key to the underworld, we have the sacred treasures that Pit used to defeat Medusa last time, and now we can head towards the final battle against Medusa. So Pit is equipped with all his fancy equipment, those 3 sacred treasures, and as such we can take Pit straight to the underworld. Now there are some enemies in this segment that will actually cause damage to you if you shoot them, so you have to avoid that, otherwise your health will deplete very quickly. Fortunately, the shield with the 3 sacred weapons equipped, Pit is able to successfully go through the ravine that takes him straight towards the underworld, making light work of Medusa's forces that are defending the entrance. And Thanatos' gem was a success, they make it through the door and they enter the underworld. And I gotta say, for a 3DS game, on a Nintendo console no less, they do a pretty good job with the transition here. You're basically in hell and it looks and feels like it. Everything is red, the trees down below are burnt, and the entirety of the sky is full of enemies. And as Palutena puts it, we are now in their home field advantage, and she reminds Pit that in his previous adventures, it was in the underworld where he lost the most lives. Because, as Pit remembers, the difficulty was brutal. And just as Pit continues through the onslaught of enemies, he runs into Pit 2, whom is also pummeling the underworld fools. So you have both Pit and Dark Pit heading towards Medusa to take her down, but they are not working together. And eventually, after flying over what seems to be an ocean of blood, you ascend upwards and in front of you is a giant Medusa. Although technically it's just a hologram that you communicate with. And as the duo exchange words about who's going to win this battle, she fades off into the distance, and we find the underworld castle, but before we get in there, we need to take on the final and strongest line of defense in order to enter said castle. And that's a fight against the underworld gatekeeper. This thing can do a lot of damage. As you'd expect, you have to aim for its weak points, and it has a few slower attacks, but the best defense that I found over some of its quicker ones is to just keep spinning in circles while shooting it. And as you continue to take on the gatekeeper, from out of nowhere, a foot straight to its face by Dark Pit moves it off to the side. And this opens up a chance for both Pit and Dark Pit to enter the underworld castle. Also, the funny thing is during this chapter is when you find out that Dark Pit really doesn't like that Pit keeps calling him Pit 2. And obviously, Pit is going to continue to refer to Dark Pit as Pit 2. Now once you make it inside the underworld castle, it's actually a bit quieter. You'll be heading through various doors that will take you to different areas, and each of those areas will be a reflection of one of the stages that you did before. And it seems very real, because it's the rules and the magic of Medusa. You'll get a chance to ride around on an ether ring, while taking down a fortress that looks similar to the level where we took down the Hedru, even getting to ride through the underground sewer system. And at the very end of that, you actually take on the Hedru yet again. The boss battle is titled the Hedru Reborn. Basically the same fight. I think it's a little bit easier, but it's the same fight. And once you head back into the underworld castle, you'll notice that one of the statues has crumbled. So you kind of get the idea. Behind each one of these statues is a door, and those doors will take you to an older stage. So the second door takes you back to the Labyrinth of Deceit, which is the stage in which we took down Pandora. Now, since these levels are more or less inspired by the old level that you went through and not the actual replica of the stage you went through, there are some new different deceitful things about this labyrinth. And right off the bat, you learn that the first one is that this wall of spikes is not actually there. You just kind of run right through it. There are portals at the end of each segment that'll flip you upside down, allowing you to advance through the stage on the ceiling, and you'll just kind of keep shifting perspectives along this linear pathway. There's a bit of a puzzle element to figure out which portal to run through at which time so that you can be upside down or right side up, until you make it to a platform where you get to put on another one of these Gundam suits and take down the onslaught of enemies that will keep firing towards you. And then once you get through that, you'll be able to take on Pandora yet again. And as Palutena points out, that's not actually Pandora. Medusa's power here in the underworld is to simply dress up a random soul as Pandora, which is off-putting to Palutena because she can't believe that Medusa would stoop to recycling souls, highlighting that nothing is sacred to the evil Medusa. And when Pit finally does take down this not Pandora, the pathway behind him in the main room opens up, and he can head through the underworld castle and make his way towards Medusa. And as Pit makes his way throughout these different hallways that look like caves, Medusa points out that it is ironic that Palutena would refer to herself as the goddess of light, because it's her that turned Medusa into a monster and hunted her down. Now, Palutena points out that Medusa turned into a reflection of the kind of being that she is, which prompts Medusa to rebuttal that if that same thing was to happen to Palutena, she'd be a lot more hideous than Medusa is. And once again, all this typical banter is happening while Pit is just running through these caves and taking down underworld forces. But still, he comes into the defense of Lady Palutena and points out to Medusa that it is indeed her who is evil. She's the one who turns people into stone, and she's responsible for all of this chaos. But the one thing that Pit does not understand is how it was that Medusa actually resurrected herself into this place. And Medusa actually agrees. She has no idea how either. Now, Pit thinks that she's playing dumb, but Medusa does say that her memories aren't what they were before. She doesn't remember what happened. And even Palutena chimes in and says that you're slipping, and even your life force is weaker than it used to be. And Palutena makes Medusa one final offer. She tells her that all of her commanders, Hedru, Thanatos, Pandora, they've all been defeated, but if she withdraws her army and promises to stay in the castle, Palutena will spare her. But Medusa quickly brushes off the offer. She plans to turn Pit into stone. And then finally, as Pit makes his way through many different challenging underworld enemies, he eventually gets to another rail grinding segment. This one is a bit of a wild ride, as Palutena puts it, with loops and flips and everything. And as Pit continues to make his way through the canyon, heading through a few more of these rail grinding segments and defeating everything along his way, he's finally able to enter back into the castle, where he runs over these invisible floors, jumps between some invisible platforms, runs through some narrow pathways, gets turned into an eggplant, and then finally makes it towards the giant doors that bring him into the fight against Medusa. She's massive. The fight actually takes place in the sky over here. Rather than simply just button mashing and shooting over and over again, there's a whole lot of dodging that has to take place over here. Now, the controls are simpler, so the dodging is just basically avoiding the obstacles that come onto the screen, but you will need to focus on your defense as much as your offense. Eventually, once Medusa gets enough damage, Palutena will chain down one of her legs, and that's a chance for Pit to get up close and personal and shoot Medusa in the face. Once Medusa breaks free, her demonic head will detach from its body, and Pit will have to take down this demon by shooting it in the eye as much as possible. And this thing is no slouch. Once again, you'll have to focus a lot more on defense instead of offense. It eventually will reattach to Medusa's head, but if you continue to attack it, you'll defeat the monster and the cutscene of Medusa's end will play. She will completely dissolve into thin air, and light will shine down on the underworld and destroy the entirety of the castle. And you get the credit sequence. Pit and Palutena talk about how peaceful everything is now, and how the sun feels warmer. But there is a noise off in the distance, and the hand of Hades slams down into the screen and rips the end credits right off of the 3D display. Hades, the true master of the underworld, appears. And he says, "Welcome to my underworld, Pity Pat, and you too, pretty Palutena." And as you'd expect, he is just as arrogant as ever, complimenting both Pit and Palutena on their skill and ability to take down Medusa. And as you'd expect, he's been behind all of this. He conjured up that Medusa. It's not the same Medusa. When Palutena asks how, he says it's a pinch of memories, a ton of souls, you put them in a blender, and hit frappe. He points out that Medusa's thirst for revenge was so great that it was a shame to let it go to waste, so he utilized it. And now he is the leader of the underworld, and Medusa is going to look like a sweet, cuddly bunny in comparison to what he's about to do as the leader of the underworld. And the chapter ends. Medusa's defeated, but a bigger enemy awaits. Which takes us on to chapter 10, the Wish Seed. Palutena points out that this whole Medusa thing must have been a massive distraction. He hasn't just overstepped his realm, he's kicked down the door. But as she figures everything out in the meantime, there are underworld forces that have assembled at a volcano nearby. And while Pit happens to suggest that maybe the underworld forces are here to steal magma, Palutena points out that Hades wants the Wish Seed, a seed which grants any single wish, which means it's on our hero to make it towards the seed before the underworld forces do. As you'd expect, this flying segment takes you through caves, lava, magma, and fire all over the place. It's not just a single volcano, it's a whole valley of lava. But eventually you will make it down towards the land segment, and just as Palutena predicted, Hades is there, and he wonders why the good guys also covet the Wish Seed, mocking Palutena, wondering what it is she could actually wish for. Is it just kittens and rainbows, or is it something more interesting? And when Palutena asks Hades what it is that he is wishing for, he says he has one little wish. You see this poor child? Both of her parents are dead. There was an unfortunate accident, if you know what I mean. It was a simple case of distracted chariot driving. I shouldn't have been doing my hair, says Hades. And so Hades says that he wishes to use the Wish Seed to bring the parents back. And while it seems admirable of a wish, the image shows a child surrounded by two parents that look like zombies. Because ultimately, the wish that Hades is looking for is to revive the dead so that they can serve as his army. Obviously, he's trying to play it off like it's some kind of altruistic intention, But this is Hades after all, the Lord of the Underworld. And outside of the Nintendo space, we are very familiar with the intentions of Hades when it comes to armies from the underworld. As you advance through the stage, taking down all the various obstacles and enemies along the way, Hades reappears and reminds Palutena that she never told him what her wish was. And so she concluded, based on the way that Hades was speaking to them and being honest about his intentions, that the wish seed was actually a fake. So she asked him, can it actually grant wishes? And Hades notes that she's a smart one. So this begs the question, and Pit asks it. If the wish seed is fake, why is it that the underworld forces are chasing after the wish seed? It seems that they're trying to convince everybody, including Palutena and Pit, that it's real. Hades is creatively taking advantage of mankind's greed in order to lure them towards him, as it is impossible for humans to resist the lure of a wish-granting item. So it's all bait. But it's even more conniving than that, because he knows that this will cause humans to go at war with one another. They will kill each other for this seed. This fake seed that doesn't actually grant any wish. I tell you, once you look beyond the 3D effects, this game gets a lot deeper than you'd expect. Hades is using this bait to drive the humans against one another and lead themselves towards extinction. Which, he smugly puts, is an ingenious plan, and great for his business. Now, this fake seed is actually being held by what's known as the Phoenix, and the Phoenix himself could wipe out humanity if the underworld sets him loose. And therefore, since they are here and they've fallen into Hades' trap, Palutena decides that it's on them to defeat the Phoenix, before Hades lets it unleash on humankind. And just before you make it to the end of the stage, you face off against an enemy that can turn you into a shrimp. And he will chase after you with chopsticks so he can eat you. It's instant death if he gets a hold of you, by the way. So heads up. But just beyond the magician that turns you into a shrimp, you'll make it towards your fight against the Phoenix. The immortal Phoenix, with the wish seed floating around just next to you. Now, given that the Phoenix has been fending off underworld forces, it's pretty angry. Throughout most of this battle, while trying to avoid the attacks of the Phoenix, you can also take some of these jump pads that'll shoot you up into the sky and allow you to unload more damage onto the Phoenix. As it typically goes in this battle, as it ensues, there'll be more attacks. The attacks will be harder to avoid and cause more damage if you do get hit, but eventually the Phoenix will go down. And while Pit thinks that this is great because now everybody will know that the wish seed was a fake, Hades points out that the beacon that shot up when the Phoenix was defeated is actually going to be a sign to the world that the Phoenix is no more, which will make the humans believe that someone has taken the wish seed. And Hades makes an announcement to the people of the world that the wish seed has been liberated. He says this is your chance to fulfill your wildest dreams. All you have to do is conquer anyone in your way. Hades' plan has worked all along, and Palutena completely blames herself. She foresees major bloodshed approaching, and it's all her fault, she thinks. And with that grim thought, Chapter 10 comes to a close. But there's still more to be done. As Chapter 11 begins, we are heading towards Viridi, the goddess of nature. Palutena's tone is a lot more grim at the start of this chapter. She points out that the humans have fallen for Hades' hoax, and they're killing themselves over the fantasy. The visuals in the background show massive battles. Humans attacking one another, all for this wish seed. Entire nations at war for nothing more than a lie. And flying around overhead is the underworld army that's just there to gather souls, because they rightfully expect many casualties. And Palutena finds that to be more critical, so instead of trying to stop the war, she suggests they go after the underworld army in the sky. I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but the visuals in the background of the battles, and just the way that the camera pans through everything here is just so gorgeous when you consider that this is a 3DS game especially. And then just as you're flying through everything, what seems like a massive comet flies through the sky and slams down into the battlefield where the war is taking place. And I'm talking this thing is massive. A huge eruption happens, instantly wiping out all of the living souls down there. Palutena barely pulls Pit out of it before it erupts. And surfacing from the background is the cause of the explosion, the goddess Viridi. Now Viridi is the ruler of the earth and all living things. And she hates humans because they're killing each other for nothing, a fake wish. And their very existence by nature and the destruction they cause infuriates her, so she wants to get rid of them. So she set off what she refers to as a reset bomb. This bomb that she sent down onto the humans is meant to return the earth to its natural state. Now Palutena and Pit don't like this. They obviously think it's harsh. But Viridi's defense is that they're doing the same thing to the underworld forces. Now Palutena highlights that they are trying to defend the earth and the heavens from those who seek their destruction. But, I mean, technically, that's also what Viridi is doing here. So it makes for a very interesting dynamic. Now Pit eventually enters this reset bomb, as Viridi calls it, flying through to the core of it to see the destruction that Viridi has caused. Pitt comments about how the inside of the bomb looks twisted in nature, and Viridi points out that it's humans who massacre the Earth's creatures, decimate the trees, and exploit the land. She believes they are the twisted ones, and they are the enemies of life itself. So Viridi asks Palutena, why is it that humans get the preferential treatment? And Palutena says it's because that of all of the creatures, humans are the closest to the gods. And gods are not supposed to intervene in mankind's affairs, the way that Viridi has, because Palutena says she has no right to do that. Which of course angers Viridi. What's she supposed to do, just sit back and watch as they continue to destroy the Earth? No, she'd much rather exterminate them all before it's too late. And of course, Palutena can't allow that to happen. Now, Pitt actually understands where Viridi is coming from, but wiping out humanity is not the answer, so they need to stop her. And as this is all going on, Pitt is able to make his way through this giant sphere, and eventually gets hit by a giant blast from Viridi, where he lands down inside on the ground, where now he must run through this ground section to face off against Kragalanch. And as Pitt makes his way through this stage trying to find a way through everything, he finds many trapped humans that he frees along the way. And this whole stage in general is pretty difficult. It actually drags on quite a bit. Not in like a bad way just because of how challenging it is though. But it is a bit more enjoyable to get through because Viridi is one of the more pleasant characters in this game. At least I think so. The dialogue through most of these characters is fun enough as it is, but I think the personalities of Viridi, Palutena, and Pitt really complement each other, making it a bit of a treat every time Viridi shows up as this game goes on. Now finally, you make it to the very end of the stage where you face off against what is known as the Kragalanch, the giant rock monster looking thing. It's funny because Pitt actually makes fun of the name, asking if it's a monster truck, right? Because Kragalanch. To which Viridi sarcastically replies and asks Pitt, what is he, a hole in the ground? And credit to her, she kind of makes a good point. Now the Kragalanch doesn't actually talk, which is fine because that just means that most of the conversation takes place with Viridi. But eventually Pitt does take down the giant boulder, and Viridi points out that the next reset bomb is nearly complete. And she warns that she's eventually going to drop it elsewhere. So now not only do our duo have to worry about Hades, but they also have to worry about Viridi. They need to figure out a plan. Which takes us right into the start of Chapter 12, the Wrath of the Reset Bomb. Viridi's forces of nature and Hades' forces of the underworld are at odds with one another. They are in their own battle. Now Viridi may not like humans, but she dislikes the forces of the underworld even more because they're actually worse than humans. They have complete disregard for life. But Hades chimes in and he says, hey, at least I give the humans you kill peace after death. So you Viridi are not one to talk. And amongst all of this, Palutena suggests to use their chaos to their advantage. She knows that Viridi plans to drop a bomb somewhere, and Hades' army is also after the humans so they don't stand a chance. And as they discuss this off in the distance, they notice the next bomb that's dropping down. So Pitt charges towards the bomb. Viridi calls Pitt a dweeb. Palutena agrees that he is a dweeb, and Pitt points out that every dweeb has his day. When Pitt makes it towards the bomb, he has to be careful and fly around it and destroy its vulnerable areas, which basically is these green glowing orbs. Eventually, this will expose the core of the bomb, and Pitt will make light work of it and destroy it. But now that it's defunct, Palutena points out that they should head towards this factory that she's making the reset bombs in and shut it down, to avoid any more of these bombs heading towards the Earth. And so Pitt begins to beeline it towards the bomb factory, flies around for a bit as Palutena finds a location for him to land. Now, similar to when we entered the pirate ship, the enemies here are going to be a bit more unique. These are not the forces of the underworld, they're the forces of nature. But the traversal through this land segment is pretty much going to be in line with everything you've experienced so far. The most unique thing about it is the visuals, and the fact that eventually Hades does show up, so you do get a little bit of everything. But seeing the clear blue skies and the beanstalks and the rainbows out in the distance does definitely add to the charm. Now, in regards to the forces of the underworld being here, Palutena asks a pretty good question. She understands what it is that Viridi has against Hades. But what is it exactly that Hades has against Viridi? Why is he here? And Pitt points out that it's very simple. Destruction is fun for Hades. And Hades reinforces this by saying that this is just his idea of a good time. He's a mischief maker after all. Now Pitt eventually descends into the bomb depot where everything inside is organic, which leads to a few more quips of dialogue between all of the characters that are taking part in this whole situation. And finally, after they head outside, Pitt gets another one of his Gundam suits and takes down any of the enemies along his way. We make it to the end of the stage, and we find the reset bomb pod. So we have our target, but defending the pod are also guards that are summoned by Viridi. Attacking the guards and attacking the shell will eventually expose the actual pod itself and give Pitt a chance to shoot it as many times as possible. And once the pod is defeated, eventually it and the entire depot explodes, prompting Viridi to officially put Pitt at the top of her to kill list. And that swings us straight into Chapter 13, the Lunar Sanctum. Now, this one starts off with Pit being pretty cheery, singing this song, almost like a heroic tune about a hero that he's just made about himself, I guess. And I guess he's trying to cement himself amongst the stories of legends, so he's making his own music. Dude's in a good mood because he took down Viridi, but Palutena suggests that they need to take down her forces, specifically Arlen the Serene, who has a weapon that is so lethal it makes the reset bombs seem like firecrackers. And off into the distance, while they're up there in the sky, what appears to be a moon ends up opening up with a red laser in the middle of it, and that's actually Arlen's lunar sanctum. So it's massive and dangerous, firing a ton of lasers as Pit as he heads towards it. Points out that Arlen must be preparing for an attack, but Arlen says he's not attacking anything. He's too busy defending. There's a very respectful bit of dialogue between Arlen and Palutena and Pit over here. Both sides are kind of telling the other, it's like, hey, we're willing to lay down arms if you do first. There's no need for unnecessary chaos. Palutena even says, hey, we should join forces and take on the underworld together. But Arlen says that those kinds of decisions fall to the will of the Mistress Viridi. And so all Pit and Palutena are left to do is to try to destroy this massive weapon that can easily destroy the Earth. And of course, all Arlen can do is defend his station. This whole stage is kind of fun because it feels like an air battle in Star Wars. You're basically up against something that resembles the Death Star. And as you head through its tunnels and its trenches, avoiding all of the obstacles along your way while defeating the enemies that attack you, you'll get to a section where you need to defeat gates as you fly towards them to make sure that you can clear your pathway. And once you do that, you'll get to land on the Lunar Sanctum, which is basically a giant golden fortress. Very classy for Arlen, especially because he continues to compliment and commend Pit and Palutena's success as they run through the stage. There's a whole other rail grinding segment too that you eventually get to where you have to shoot the switches to expand the route that you take, otherwise you'll actually just fall into a bottomless pit. But outside of that, it's more of what you've come to expect as you go through every level, just an increase in difficulty. Mostly because many of these enemies now take more hits to go down. You'll make it to an area where there's a giant mirror on the wall, and in the mirror you can see the path that you can walk on, but where you're actually standing, if you look ahead of you, it's simply a bottomless pit, so you need to steer at the mirror while navigating Pit across the pathway. But obviously this comes with the added issue in that Pit's control on the ground kind of stinks, so it's very easy to lose a bunch of lives over here. Or I guess you technically don't lose a life if you fall down, you just kind of lose some health and have to start the segment over from the beginning. Now this segment is not only difficult because of the controls, it's also difficult because if you have the 3D slider on original hardware, the depth perception helps a little bit, but it's still mostly because of sensitive controls. Now weirdly enough, once you do make it beyond this, what awaits you is Dark Pit, or as regular Pit calls him, Pit 2. And they waste no time, they start fighting immediately. Apparently, Arlen called Pit 2. He recruited him, which surprises Palutena because typically, Pit 2 doesn't listen to anybody. But Arlen says it's actually pretty simple. All he did was mention that the regular Pit would be there, and that was enough to convince Dark Pit to come to the Sanctum. Now in this room, you're not only fighting against Dark Pit, you're also trying to destroy the control center of the Sanctum itself, which from a gameplay angle just means you're fighting against Dark Pit while also trying to shoot the giant ball that's in the middle of the room. Now once Pit is destroyed, you can just kind of keep going in circles and shoot the sphere itself. But that's not the actual end of the stage yet. You'll take a giant elevator and head upwards, and go through the remainder of the stage. Palutena asks Arlen why is it that this area was created? Why is it that they built the Sanctum? And he replies that that information is highly confidential. He took an oath of silence and he intends to honor it. He cannot tell them why this Sanctum was built, but what he can tell them is that it entirely runs on his powers. Without him, it's nothing. And so, since allegiances are very clear, it's evident that Pit needs to take down Arlen if he wants to destroy the Sanctum. And sure enough, waiting for you at the very end of this seemingly pretty long stage, to be honest, is Arlen the Serene. And as the two battle each other, with compliments going in both directions, and multiple segments including one where Arlen completely disappears, Pit defeats Arlen and he says that he can finally catch his breath. And as Pit and Palutena fly off with the exploding Sanctum behind them, they notice that something manages to escape, but they gotta worry about that later, because for now they still need to focus on Viridi's forces. So that takes us over to Chapter 14, the Lightning Battle. Takes place in the sky, and you have to now deal with both Viridi's forces as well as the Underworld army, because Hades joined the fray. Now apparently Hades has opted to put Thanatos back into play as the commander, so he's back. And leading the forces of nature is Phosphora, whom, as we can see as the stage continues, is pretty flirtatious, especially with Pit. Now, Thanatos' case, well, Pitt's a little bit surprised because this is like his third time being resurrected. And according to Hades, it's because Thanatos is a special case. Particularly, he gets all these special perks because he's the god of death, so he gets evil powers and health insurance, and a free soda apparently. That's not my joke, that's Hades's. And of course, with all of these characters joined together at once, there's just a lot of conversations and quips going on back and forth. Actually, Phosphorus straight up takes out Thanatos for you in the beginning of the stage, so that's taken care of at least. But what makes it extra fun is Hades' commentary in the background as well as Viridius cheering on her commander. Eventually, Palutena finds a way for Pitt out of this giant storm that they're flying through, and she brings him over to the Thundercloud Temple, which has been abandoned since the ancient times. And as far as Phosphorus is concerned, well, she can't believe they made it there already because she did not have time to take a shower. Now, to everybody's surprise, her defenses are still pretty strong. Her fight against Thanatos clearly didn't slow her down. And so, Pitt goes down for a landing into the temple. Now, the way most of this temple plays out is that there is just lightning everywhere that can easily harm you. Floors, walls, objects, and the like. And Phosphor, of course, is the one who's powering this entire place. There'll be random blockades that slow you down, in which case you have to destroy a power supply in order to move forward. And of course, all the while this is going on, Phosphora keeps throwing more winks and nudges towards the bravado behind Pitt and how manly he is. She even starts to call him cute a few times, and of course, he starts to blush, and realizes that she's not just teasing him, she's straight up flirting with him. It's kind of funny just seeing this all play out while you're going through a temple and destroying these enemies in front of you. But yeah, it's not even discreet, she's straight up hitting on the dude. In fact, Palutena even has to step in and tell him, hey, like, I know it's difficult when she's flirting with you, but remember that she is the enemy. Get it together, Pity. Don't risk it all. In any case, after advancing through a few rooms that offer various types of platforming or puzzle challenges, a final run around a hazardous path around the outside of the temple will finally lead you to Phosphora, whom, as you might expect, is laying down in mid-air, waiting for Pitt to enter. But Pitt's focused, does his usual battle cry, I am the servant of Palutena, the goddess of light, and, well, he gets a quick zap from Phosphora and told to basically shut up. As you'd expect, most of the gimmick of this fight is revolving around lightning. Those are her attacks primarily. She's going to send as many shocks as possible towards Pitt, and you're tasked with dodging and trying to hit her whenever you get a chance. But I do appreciate that when Pitt makes his final blow, his commanding victory shout is, did you see that thunder? And Phosphora quickly replies, no, 'cause you can't see thunder. Of course, after that, she says that she takes back everything that she said before, that he's not cute at all. I don't even like you anyway. But to everybody's surprise, more specifically to Viridi's surprise, her commander is now gone. Both of them. And she's next. According to Pitt, anyway. And according to Palutena, Hades' turn is coming soon as well. So that takes us to Chapter 15, The Mysterious Invaders, where Palutena is waking Pitt up bright and early, because there is a massive problem, an emergency that is larger than all of the gods. Off in the distance is a giant object floating overhead, and it's ransacking the earth. And it's these weird enemies that look like they come from an advanced civilization attacking Pitt now. And we don't know what they are. They are not the army of the underworld, and Viridi points out that they don't look natural. They clearly cannot be her army either. Even Hades is surprised. He's thinking that it might be Viridi and Palutena teaming up to attack him. So none of the gods know what they are. Pitt assumes that they seem to be invaders from outer space. But Viridi points out that they're not just invading the Earth, they're swarming and they're harvesting whole sections of the Earth. Like bees taking pollen back to whatever hive they call home. And so all of our forces now have a common enemy. The forces of the underworld, the forces of nature, and Pitt all have to work together to stop whatever it is these things are. And as you fly through the stage taking on enemies and see the funky looking artifacts that are off in the distance that look like they dropped straight out of a sci-fi film, there's an interruption of another god joining into the discussion, Pyrrhon, the sun god, who's having a blast. And he actually seems to know who they are. He says they are known as the Arum, and this passel of floating islands is just one of their bases. And I think the crazy thing about this sentiment is how Hades reacts. Like, he's genuinely shocked that this is only one of their bases, and how much more hell do they plan to raise, which is massive coming from Hades' mouth, to be honest. It really highlights the scale of these invaders. And the reason that Pyrrhon knows about this is because, well, he's knowledgeable. It's all in the Book of Divine Prophecy, Chapter 84, Section 3. Beckoned by destruction and corruption, the Arum are born from and returning to nothing. They travel across the galaxy to swallow up the heavens, land, and seas. So basically, the Arum are going to eat the entirety of the Earth. But stow your fear because Pyrrhon has a delivery, and the return address is justice. Yeah, I'm having a good time. I like this guy. And now Pitt rightfully questions whether or not we can trust this wacko. But as Viridi points out things are dire, because that's the guy that we're listening to. And so Pit and Palutena decide to let Pyron take care of things on that side of the land as they fly through the island to the other side. Now Viridi points out that the Aurum are not only blowing up the Earth, they're taking pieces of it for themselves. And Palutena actually thinks it was Hades and Viridi who lured the Aurum to the world, because Pyron read that they are beckoned by destruction and corruption. And with the amount of destruction and corruption that's been going on since we started this adventure, it must have made the Earth look pretty delicious to the Aurum. And of course, this conclusion now just puts everybody pointing fingers and blaming the other person, including Palutena and Pit being blamed. Regardless of who started all of this, at the end of the day, they are on the same side and they have to work together. And so Pit and Palutena find a tower at the center of the island, and that's where Pit is going to land to start off the land segment. And it's strange, the enemies are these metallic triangles and laser beams. Everything seems to be a hive mind. They all work together like a giant machine. And I think the machine is appropriate because even the ground that you walk on looks like a machine. Honestly, strangely feels like you went back in time and you went into a level in like an old game on the SNES, like Star Fox, for example, where you gotta shoot down like blocks along your way. Except obviously things look a bit more modern. But the general gist of the game doesn't really change too much, just the visuals are a bit more unique. And finally, after heading through a long rail grinding segment, eventually you will get inside the tower. This will drop you down an elevator where you will find a single linear pathway that you need to follow downwards towards the core. And if you survive through the onslaught of enemies in that linear pathway, you'll make it to another elevator that'll take you towards the boss fight, which is a fight against the Aurum core. Now it has an exposed part in the middle, but it also has shields that surround it. So obviously just run in circles, try to take as little damage as possible, and shoot the core enough, and eventually it will explode. And just as the entirety of the island is about to face destruction, Pit is saved by Pyron, who brings him out to safety, giving Palutena a chance to withdraw Pit and prepare for the next mission. Now Pyron says he senses danger, and then the camera pans over, and now he sees the danger off in the distance. It's time to head straight to the Aurum Hive. They've been weakened, but they're not defeated. Pit needs to destroy their fleet. You'll be flying through a ton of ships and they'll all have their weak spots exposed. It's these green orbs that you have to shoot to get them to explode. They have hundreds of these ships and each one is pretty large, like a huge fleet of battleships heading towards the Earth. So the objective for Pit is pretty clear: destroy everything. On the other hand, for Hades, he sees this as an opportunity and sends his underworld forces to the ship to do some looting. Now eventually Palutena does notice the hive in the background, basically the factory in which everything here is created, whether it's the giant ships or the tiny little drones. And so they begin to fly towards it while avoiding oncoming attacks. Now Viridi actually points out something interesting. The Aurum troops that they're now facing look like underworld enemies. They look like ripoffs of the enemies that you've been facing all game. They're knockoffs, as Hades puts it. So basically, as the Aurum come towards the Earth and cultivate, they eventually start to create copies of what they see down there. But still, despite all of this, nobody is sensing any form of life, not Viridi or Palutena. But something has to be controlling them. Now eventually Pit does make it to the hive, but there seems to be no place to land. There are massive shields that become exposed so that the forces of the Aurum could head out of the hive, but it seems to be a one-way street. They still can't land inside. Well, until Hades finds a solution, grabbing one of the battleships and launching it straight into the force field, creating a passageway for Pit to enter into the hive. Then I just kind of love how both Viridi and Pit have a moment where they're just like taken aback by how cool Hades was in that moment. Anyway, now we are in the land section of the hive and we're heading through all of these narrow tunnels that honestly look like they could be ripped straight out of the DS Metroid game. And the goal here is to pass through all of these enemies and all of these booby traps and lasers and other miscellaneous obstacles to find a way to make it to the generator that's running this hive. And as you'd expect, we are in the second half of the game now. Things are a lot more difficult. I think by this point I was starting off my stages at around level 6 intensity, and I wasn't losing as many lives, but I definitely did lose one in the start of this stage. Regardless, this stage is a minor bit of a labyrinth, with a few puzzle-like set pieces along the way. Nothing too intense, I mean you're not playing a puzzle game, but it's enough to keep you entertained if the dialogue between Palutena and Viridi is not doing enough to humor you. Now eventually you do get to a door that takes you outside, where some long rails will lead you through the sky while you are under attack. Fortunately, just when it seems like you are being overwhelmed by the enemies, the forces of nature come and save you, prompting Viridi to tell Pit not to get the wrong idea. She's not here to help him after all. She's just here because it's in her best interest to keep him alive for now. And you kind of get the feeling here that the characters are really starting to like one another. Maybe not so much with Hades, but at least Viridi with Palutena and Pit. In any case, at the very end of these long rail grinding segments, you take on one more onslaught of a whole bunch of enemies, before finally making it to the Aurum Hive's power generator. And as Pitt points out, it looks just like a sun. It's definitely as bright as one. And fittingly, since it is a fight against the sun, the self-proclaimed heroic hand of justice is here to help as well. Pyron, the sun god. And really all you're doing during this fight is flying around and jumping between different rails while unloading bullets over onto the sun. And you do have to carefully choose which rails to jump on to avoid taking damage. And once that's all done, just like we've seen so many times in this game up until this point, the core, or in this case the generator, explodes and the entirety of the base is destroyed along with it. Although in fairness, the magnitude of this explosion seems like it's a lot larger. And just as you assume that you are finished with the Aurum, as the camera pans out, we get a glimpse of Pyron, who says it's now time to move on to the Aurum Brain, which obviously is going to be the title of Chapter 17. And everybody's here. Hades with his underworld assault on the Aurum central nervous system, Viridi with her children of nature head towards the brain, Pyron with his pyro cannon action, and of course, Palutena and Pitt, all together teaming up so they can take down the Aurum Brain. And just as Pitt points out, it's kind of insane how all of the largest egos in the world are teaming up together against a common enemy. And as big as we thought that the Aurum Hive was, well, the fortress that houses the brain of the Aurum is actually way larger in scale. And of course it is. This is what controls everything. This is the central nervous system, the base of operations, and the core of the hive mind. And really this whole segment just kind of plays out the exact same way as the last one did, just with different visuals in the background. The big difference is, however, that eventually you do make it to the Aurum Brain without having to land. And you unload a whole bunch of shots at it, and as it lights up and it's about to explode, Palutena immediately pulls Pitt out of there before he's caught in the crossfire. And apparently this explosion of the core causes Pyron to power up. I guess, I don't know, there's like some ultraviolet elements or something here. I don't know what exactly the lore is of this guy. But in his powered up state, he's able to flex for a little bit, and just as you'd expect he'd give a final hit and take down the Aurum, he points out that he is now a level infinity super god plus, which I can only assume scales at the same power of a Super Saiyan god Super Saiyan. But with great power comes great responsibility. Responsibility which clearly Pyron doesn't care for. Because as much as I enjoyed this character, well, now he's a little power hungry, and he begins to shoot towards Pitt. Or more specifically, the Aurum now obeys his orders, and they change colors and start to fire towards Pitt. So Pyron is now the brain of the hive mind. Who could have seen that coming? Although, I'll be honest, the first time I played, I thought it was going to be Hades at this point. But still, this works as well. And so now, everybody else has to figure out how to take down Pyron, because taking him down is how you defeat the Aurum. And now, reluctantly, Viridi says apparently there's no choice and she has to use her last remaining jewel. I guess she saved a reset bomb in her back pocket, just in case she needed it. But as the nature bomb starts to engulf the entirety of the fortress, Pyron very quickly and easily burns it away. And to add insult to injury, Palutena's ability to keep Pitt flying is running out. So she quickly tries to extract him, but she's unable to. And she has no idea why. And apparently it's because Pyron is using some form of telekinesis to block her. And in the midst of battle, Pitt's ability to fly runs out. He begins to spiral down towards the earth, accepting that this is the end. But fortunately for him, Viridi is here to save the day once again, offering him a platform to land on as long as he aligns himself properly, and doing so gets you down to the land segment. Although I guess calling this a land segment is not really that accurate, but you get the idea. Regardless, once again, Viridi has saved Pitt, and Pitt notes it. And of course she tells him to just shut his yapper and get ready to fight. Because as it turns out, the Aurum are actually stronger with Pyron at the helm. And really, if they don't take him down, they may not have a tomorrow. Now, through most of the segment, you're stuck on a very small platform. Eventually, Viridi will make another one spawn in front of you, but you're still just kind of fighting in a very cramped space. So the game kind of goes back into more or less an on-rail segment, only this time it's less of an on-rail shooter and more of an auto-scroller out of a lack of better phrase. Now in the background, the forces of nature are hard at work trying to move Pitt forward towards Pyron, but Pyron hits Pitt with a massive attack. And while Pitt comes out of it unscathed, the troops that were carrying him from the forces of nature, well, they weren't as lucky. And so Pitt once again begins to drop down below. But this time, he is saved by the Centurions. And now everybody realizes that the Centurions are not strong enough to be here. I mean, shoot, even Palutena is like, yeah, they're in way over their heads, but they're very useful and their intentions in the right place. And Pitt points out that they should just get out of there, because they don't stand a chance and they're easily going to get hurt. But Palutena reminds Pit that he simply needs to focus on Pyron and nothing else. Whereas the Centurions, on the other hand, they're simply just keeping him afloat and they're pulling him towards the enemy. Almost like they are nothing more than horses pulling a chariot. But they are very loyal. They remind Pit, as their captain, that the mission is to defeat Pyron and to eliminate the Arum forces. And the Centurions dedicate their energy and resources to helping him reach that goal, no matter the cost. Look, I'm not gonna lie, even though I had zero feelings for the Centurions before this moment, I still thought this whole cheesy moment was very cool. They charge directly towards battle, no defenses, and it's just an onslaught of enemies one after the other. And then some obstacles pop up out of the way, and if you don't destroy them fast enough, you lose the Centurions. And it kind of stinks because Pit knows that if he was able to be quick enough to protect them, they'd still be there. Now, fortunately, Palutena had 2 more on standby and they take over for the other ones that fell. And the 2 of them continue to pull Pit towards the end of the stage, running through obstacles, lasers, enemies, everything. And you actually have to protect them. If you don't protect those 2 final Centurions, you actually lose a life. You have to start over. I remember on my second life when I lost one of them, I really started to feel the intensity. The whole moment just feels so full of adrenaline, full of energy. And the thing is, even I was taking a bunch of hits. As the gamer, the urgency was felt on my end. But as the chariot blasts through the forces and Pyron is waiting dead ahead, Pit notes that something seems off about Pyron. I mean, for goodness sake, his voice sounds like a robot at this point. And when you do make it towards him for the boss fight, well, he's speaking in binary. Nothing but 1s and 0s. So initially, we thought that Pyron took over the powers of the Arum, but what actually happened is that the Arum absorbed Pyron. And Pyron is being controlled by the Arum, even though he is clearly trying to fight it off. And so it is up to Pit now to not only take down the Arum, but to save Pyron from the control of the Arum. And in doing so, you guessed it, he's at the core of another giant fortress, shooting various objects in the room, which at its center holds the brain of everything, or of the Arum at least. Throughout the outside of the area that you're standing on are the shackles that are holding Pyron towards the brain. Once you take those down, you'll be able to unload on the enemy. Not to keep bringing this back to Dragon Ball Z, but it almost looks like Goku standing in front of a spirit bomb. And with all of the jumping and dodging and sliding around that Pit does, eventually he takes down the fusion of Arum and Pyron. And I kind of love this because as everything is about to explode, Palutena points out that she needs to extract them, and Pit remarks that this all feels familiar, and she says, of course, we've been doing this a lot recently. And in the nick of time, Pit is saved, and off in the distance we see the explosion of the giant fortress. And the hope here for everybody is that Pyron, with this massive explosion, shifts this whole entire thing to the other end of the galaxy, which means now our heroes can focus back on what's important, the fight against the underworld army. But when chapter starts, it's a little odd. Pit is all alone. The last thing he remembers is defeating the Arum. Out in the distance, he spots a ring, and for some reason, the name Chaos Kin is stuck in his brain. And then the camera brightens to trees in the background with fire, and a ring sitting in a child's hand. And apparently, Pit is that ring in the child's hand. And look, I gotta say, if you are not paying attention while playing in this game and you start this chapter, it can get confusing very quickly. But on the flip side, if you are paying attention every step of the way, yeah, it's equally as confusing. When the child puts the ring on, it grants Pit the power to control the child. He's moving her. And now you, the player, are just running through this field towards a burning fortress on this rail shooter in the 3DS, wondering what the heck is going on. It's weird, like you, the player, are just as confused as Pit is. And the whole situation is kind of bizarre. It feels like a whole different game altogether. And this chapter, of course, is known as the Ring of Chaos. Off in the distance, there is a sight of Centurions fighting at the castle. So Pit concludes that Lady Palutena must have sent her troops over there to help out with the fight. He is aware that he is putting this little girl in danger, but he needs to figure out what's going on for the greater good. Unfortunately, however, she trips and the ring comes off her finger. But now, a dog finds the ring. And now, instead of being a little girl, we get to control a dog. And just as Pit puts it, things are just getting weirder and weirder. But with our little puppy friend, we head towards the town, and just as we enter up into the sky, we see Pit, or rather somebody controlling the body of Pit, causing our protagonist to ask and wonder who is he attacking and who's controlling him. And this whole segment is really kind of weird. You're running through the tunnels, following the paths of the Centurions, figuring out how to maneuver between different pathways and platforms, It actually draws on for a little bit longer than you'd expect, to be honest. But it does add to the confusion and the suspense, right? Because you have no idea what's going on. And when you finally make it outside, you find the coolest character in the game, Magnus, and he's fighting off against the Centurions. Pitt, of course, is trying to get Magnus's attention, but he doesn't know how to speak dog. And so Pitt is trying to hand him over the ring, and he's hoping that he will put the ring on his finger. But Magnus isn't interested. He inspects it for a bit and throws it off behind him. Fortunately, as Magnus is walking off, in the last second, he finally decides to turn back around and put the ring on his finger. And we start to get some context. So Pitt is in the driver's seat here, but Magnus is actually fully there, at least in his mind, and the duo start to have a conversation. Now the cool thing is, while this is all going along, you get to control Magnus. And I don't say this lightly, but man, do I wish there was a whole game based around just being Magnus. He is a lot of fun to control. Just the size of the sword swinging around everywhere, the sheer brute force with every swing and the lack of needing to aim at everything makes him so fun. And look, I liked Magnus when we bumped into him earlier on in the game, but it was during this level where he easily became one of my favorite characters. It's just so fun to swing through all the enemies with his giant melee attack. Now apparently though, this event, what's happening real time in front of us, is 3 years since the beginning of the game. So whatever happened to Pitt with this whole debacle that turned him into a ring, put Pitt out of commission for 3 years. Naturally, that freaks out Pitt. That freaks me out. And so Pitt asks Magnet to fill in the gaps. What's been going on? And apparently, in his absence, Pitt, or whoever is controlling his body, has become the enemy of mankind. And in turn, the Centurions have joined alongside Pitt. After the war between the forces of nature, the underworld, and Palutena's army, it seemed like everything was over, and everyone in Palutena's army suddenly vanished. And when that happened, that left the humans wide open to be attacked by the army of the underworld. And sadly, when Pitt and Palutena's army reappeared, they started going after the humans as well. So now, for the last 3 years, the humans have the underworld and Palutena's armies both trying to wipe them out. And nobody knows why. Magnus even asks if the goddess just lost her mind. But Pitt obviously has no idea what's going on. He has no answer for that. He's been a ring for the last 3 years. And so Pitt says he needs to find a way to communicate with her, to figure out what the heck is going on. So the duo start to develop a plan, realizing that Pitt is no longer controlling the body that he has, and Magnus even comments about how the body has been killing so many lives. So he tells Pitt that since he is controlling his body, he needs to use it to get rid of the other Pitt. Which ironically is why Magnus was there in the first place. They're going to take down Pitt. And now you, the player, get to run through the stage, enjoying Magnus's overconfidence as he mows down all of the Centurions that are along his path. It's like you get this single stage that feels more like a hack and slash than anything else, and it's just such a delight. Now, I'll be honest, previously in the story, when all of the Arum stuff happened and they went up to outer space and fought off those beings of the hive mind, I did feel like it was a bit of the story that was excessively tacked on. Like, it felt like just an additional enemy and obstacle to go through while your main goal is Hades. Almost like it was filler content just kind of thrown into the story to extend the game a little bit. I mean, even thinking to myself, there are still like 7 or 8 chapters remaining of the game. What are they going to do? Just bring up another force of evil that you have to fight against? I think I briefly started to feel like I was getting bored with the game. But this whole dynamic here, being able to control Magnus, not knowing what happened in the last 3 years, where is Palutena, what's been going on, I gotta admit it made for a very exciting final couple of hours of the title. It genuinely changed up the pace just enough for the big finale. Now, we're still not quite there yet, but we are working towards it. And speaking of which, we finally bump into Pitt, or his body rather, and the body is mute. So now it's on Magnus, or Pitt, controlling Magnus rather, to figure out a way to take him down, but without killing him. We gotta get that ring on Pitt's hand. Anyway, it's a hack and slash battle. Magnus points out that Pitt is the only one in Palutena's army that's actually strong enough where he needs to try because the Centurions are very weak. That seems to be a common conclusion that many people are making in this game. So naturally in this fight against Pitt, Magnus can't hold back. Now, to be honest, I was still kind of 50-50 on whether or not this was going to be Dark Pitt, but no, it's actually Pitt. You're fighting against him, and when you take him down, Magnus takes the ring off, puts it on Pitt's hand, and Pitt wakes up back in his body. Our protagonist immediately tries to reach out to Palutena, telling her that he needs her power so he can fly back to Skyworld, and a light shines down from the heavens and pulls him up. And off he goes into an air battle. So this stage is very unique because you did the land segment first. Bet you weren't expecting that. But as Pitt flies through the skies and he tries to communicate with Palutena, it turns out it was not Palutena that sent him a lending hand. Instead, it was Viridi. She's the one who answered his call for help, and Pitt now is fighting against the Centurions in the sky, with the forces of nature helping him out. So Pitt asks the same question that we're all wondering. Can she tell him what happened to Palutena? And so she tells Pitt that she's gonna do him one better. She's gonna take him on a non-stop flight directly to Skyworld. And of course, it's just a ruthless battle all the way up, windstorms all around you, stone buildings and pillars flying through the air, enemies blocking your path, and eventually you do make it up to Skyworld, but it looks destroyed. It looks bleak. This is not the same Skyworld that Pitt left behind. Viridi points out that Palutena's gone off the deep end and in the process even destroyed Skyworld. Now what's intriguing is that she's still fighting against the Underworld army, but she's mankind's enemies now as well. And eventually, off in the distance, Viridi points out Palutena's temple, which give Pitt a chance to finally speak to the goddess of light. Immediately, straight to the point, Pitt asks Palutena what exactly is going on, and she quickly tells Pitt that everything changes, even gods. And to be frank, she's tired of fighting for the ungrateful humans. Now, of course, Pitt knows that she's being manipulated. This is not something that she would say. And the only thing on our hero's mind is helping Palutena. So he tells Viridi that he needs to find a way to get to her. So Viridi launches him towards the temple, but he bounces right off of it like a bouncy ball. Now, Viridi actually knew this was going to happen. She finds this hilarious. Apparently, Palutena's temple is protected by a force field, but the stage actually does end at that point, and Chapter 18 is complete. So we got some questions answered, but not all of them. Not yet, at least. The cool thing is when you go into the transition menu where you can, upgrade your weapons and do all that fun RPG stuff that I discussed earlier in the video, but I've kind of glossed over throughout this adventure. Instead of being in a hub where Palutena's set up, where it's like everything is in Skyworld and she's the one who's narrating, you're being hosted by Viridi, who points out that whether or not Pitt likes it, she's taking over Palutena's duties. Because as she puts for the third or fourth time in the game, anything that Palutena can do, she can do better. And Pitt just straight up tells Viridi that she's awesome. I think we kind of knew where this was going. Eventually, Viridi was going to be on Pitt's side. They were going to become good friends and join forces. And this little transition over here with the conversation that they're having kind of cements it. Whether she likes it or not, she's effectively one of the good guys now. Now, she makes things very clear. She's only allying with him right now because she still wants to take down Hades, but we all know. That's what they all say. Anyway, after some quick updates, we can start the next chapter, which is titled The Lightning Chariot. Pitt's heading on the pathway towards saving Palutena. The underworld forces are there, the forces of nature are helping Pitt, and Viridi points out that the only way to get into the force field that surrounds Palutena's temple is to use the Lightning Chariot. It's a super fast paddle carriage that's actually pulled by unicorns. And so, as Pitt points out, we're gonna take these horses and we're gonna slam them at full speed into the force field. Which, it would make anybody ask the question, are we going to die? And follow-up question made by Pitt, does it at least have airbags? But obviously it doesn't, so Pitt starts to say that maybe this is not a good idea. Maybe he needs to draw the line somewhere. But Viridi knows the best way to convince our hero is to remind him that his goal is to save Palutena. Perhaps he actually does not care about her. She could be in agony at this very moment. She could be trapped inside a dungeon of madness. She could be crying out, "Oh, help me, Pitt, oh, please." Pitt knows that she's playing him, but it's totally working. So he agrees that it is his duty to rescue her, which means they must find the Lightning Chariot and slam into the force field at full speed. Now, in order to find this galactic chariot, Pitt needs to be literally put into a cannon and blasted off into outer space. And as he flies through the cosmos, takes down more swarms of enemies, enjoys the beautiful visuals down below, Viridi comments about the underworld forces that all happen to be up here too, wondering if maybe they're also after the Lightning Chariot. But before they even have time to process the thought, the chariot blasts right past them, and the chase is on. But during this chase, Hades appears, and he admits that he is also after the chariot. Now the Lightning Chariot does make it to its home base, and therefore Pitt has to go down there and retrieve it. Quickly getting a welcome message from the Lightning Chariot Master, warning Pitt that he needs to leave his domain. So Pitt tries to kindly ask him for a favor, if he can borrow the chariot, and the Chariot Master finds this to be offensive and disrespectful, just coming in here uninvited, making foolish requests like that. I mean, shoot, even Viridi agrees with the Lightning Chariot Master. She's like, yeah, that was kind of rude of you, Pitt. And so Pitt decides that he needs to work his way up this entire tower to speak to the Chariot Master face to face. And so the brunt of this stage is basically just working your way upwards around the outside of the tower, walking inside, going through some platforms, obstacles, defeating some enemies, and working your way up to the next level. And of course, Hades is here too, and he is not welcome either. Now, some of the floors in these towers do get interesting, there are segments where two different colored portions of the flooring either harm you or you're safe on them, so you have to alternate back and forth between the two of them, depending on which one is trying to hurt you. There's just these minor details to make things a little bit more challenging and spice up the level a little bit. There's a section where you have to dodge rolling boulders, a portion where you ride another aether ring and take down enemies, which actually does lead Viridi to ask and wonder why is it that a chariot master has an aether ring, which the chariot master replies, isn't it obvious? Prompting her to say, are you saying that you're a god? In which he replies, I am not saying anything. A lot of mysterious people in this game that just like to feed you a little bit of information and then keep their mouth shut as if they said nothing. In any case, as you move through the final few areas, you get to run through a quick driving segment up in the sky, boosting at just the right time before you reach the end of the ramp to make the final jump. A lot easier said than done when you're not using touchscreen controls in this case. Beyond that, you get to a room where you take on an onslaught of enemies to defeat them so that the portal in the middle can open up and then you work your way upwards. And now in the circular platform in the tower, Hades sends his minions after Pit. Now, interestingly enough, Hades is actually fully aware of Pit's time as a ring, which surprises Pit, and when he confronts Hades about it, Hades kind of backpedals. He's like, oh, well, if you didn't know about it, it's a secret, then don't mind me. Mum's the word. So Pit quickly asks him if he is the one who turned Pit into a ring, and Hades just starts laughing at him. He tells Pit that he's the cause of all of this chaos. Now Viridi, being the good friend that she is now, quickly tries to jump in and tell Pit not to listen to him and that the underworld army is the one to blame, but there's definitely a thought here that all of these events have unfolded because of something that Pit did. Now, this stage does drag on quite a bit. In 2 or 3 different segments, Pit asks if we're there yet, and that leads to some kind of like quippy reply from Viridi. There's even like this whole maze that you have to run through that has enemies along the way too. And even when you make it past that, you gotta run outside. There's like a haunted house that's just firing attacks at you. And then even after that, you take on a whole bunch of enemies from the underworld, including the ones that turn you into eggplants. And once you finish off that onslaught of enemies, you go back outside and you continue to work your way up the tower, this time grinding on a rail. A very long rail, I might add. And at the end of that, you think you're done, but no, you get to a giant room with more enemies, but this time you get to take them on with a Gundam suit. And then you get back outside, jump pads over the bottomless pits, working your way upwards, of course, fighting off the armies of the underworld, work your way inside. A giant room of hot springs, so at the very least you get to replenish all of your health. And finally, just beyond that, we make it to the Chariot Master, who quickly presents Pit with his own chariot and tells him to grab the reins. Naively, Pit thanks him for this, but the Chariot Master tells him you misunderstand. This is no gift. It's a battle on the chariots. A high-speed unicorn rainbow road battle while you're trying to shoot down the Chariot Master. It's so bizarre, but it's a welcome change to the game at least. Now, in order to operate the lightning chariot, you do need both unicorns, which means it's on Pit to take down the Chariot Master so he can get the other one. Now, why did the Chariot Master offer this unicorn for Pit? Well, I can only assume it's for the love of the game, to be honest. Doesn't really make any sense, but it does make for a fun boss battle. You gotta dodge his attacks as he fires back towards you while also shooting him any chance you get. Now, Pit stresses that this is not how he wanted things to go, but he has to save Lady Palutena. And the Chariot Master says, I completely understand. For my own master, I would not hesitate to dirty these hands. So Pit asks if he serves someone as well, and the Chariot Master replies that he did, and that he suffered countless war wounds, but none greater than the loss of his master. He once had many comrades, but all he has left is his 2 faithful steeds. But a warrior's path always inevitably leads to loss. He has no qualms about it. And as it stands right now, he's nothing more than just a soul. Most of his body has degraded away. He doesn't outright say it, but it seems like this is a test for Pit to see if he's worthy. And you can tell because just as he's hit with the finishing blow, the first thing he says to Pit is, well done. He tells Pit that he's proven himself worthy of his lightning chariot. And even though Pit doesn't want it to end this way, the Chariot Master tells him that it's the only way things can end for an old warrior. And with that, the Chariot Master withers away into the wind. And look, I know moments like this are cheesy as hell, but this is just another way where this game introduces these characters that last for a few minutes on the screen, but you become so attached to them to the point where it's actually sad when they're defeated. And it just creates such a larger impact to the story as you're heading towards the end of the game, because now you're not only doing it for yourself, or, Pit is not only doing it for himself, for Palutena, for humankind, but also all of these friends that he's made and lost throughout this adventure. And it's powerful because in his final words, the Chariot Master says that he has no regrets and he's trusting him with his steeds for the future of the realm. And in this moment of seriousness, even Viridi pops through and says that he was an honorable warrior. Let's not let his death be in vain. Let's go save Palutena. And since we have the lightning carriage, now we can. Starting chapter 20 heading over to Palutena's temple actually provides a fairly unique gimmick for a flying segment. Rather than having the cursor on screen and aiming at where you want to shoot at, it's more like a traditional vertical arcade-style shooter, like Space Invaders if you will. Pitt's riding directly towards Palutena's temple on the lightning chariot. Now you can still move using the touchscreen or touchpad or trackpad, whatever you're playing on, but you can also simply just use the joystick. Now to kind of tack on to a point that I was speaking about earlier, as the game goes on there are many moments where it starts to feel repetitive. Flying sections start to blur together, ground sections start to blur together. I mean, sure, there are different set pieces and different types of enemies and difficulties that could make things a little bit more intriguing, but I mean, how many times are you going to go into the middle of a fortress, blow it up, and have Palutena pull you out and watch the explosion off in the distance until it starts to feel repetitive? So stages like this one, where you're controlling things a little bit differently, do spice it up a bit, especially towards the end of the game when it starts to get a little bit too repetitive. Or for example, the stage earlier where you got to control Magnus and the child and the dog. So this was definitely very welcome. Now from an actual story perspective, mostly all that's going on is Pitt saying he's going fast and Verdi making fun of him because he's complaining about how fast he's going. But effectively, it's just a very fast ride directly towards the temple. Now eventually you do get to a warp tunnel which make things even quicker, and in that moment, Pitt asks Verdi what Hades was talking about earlier when he mentioned that he was the cause of all of this destruction, he being Pitt. And Verdi reinforces it. He says, actually, yeah, you were. You and Palutena for that matter. Apparently, when he destroyed the Lunar Sanctum 3 years ago, you know, that sanctum that housed Veridi's very eloquent commander, well, according to Verdi, that sanctum was actually a prison, and he freed the prisoner named the Chaos Kin. But as it goes, before she can elaborate on who the Chaos Kin is, we make it to Palutena's temple and have to transition to the ground segment. Sure enough, the cutscene shows the chariot going right through the force field that houses Palutena's temple. Fortunately, Pitt survives, as do the unicorns, and in a weird turn of events, offering to hold on to the lightning chariot is Phosphora. I thought she was killed, but I guess she's back too. Now she tells Pitt not to get the wrong idea. Of course she's not here to help. Stopping Palutena is Pitt's job. And, you know, this evil rendition of Palutena pops forward and tells Pitt she's surprised that he got through the force field. It seems that he's not the helpless, sniveling little thing that he was before. And evil Palutena can be mean. Now, obviously, there's something wrong with her. She's not all there. Someone is in the background manipulating her thoughts. But she tells Pitt that the reason that she's attacking the humans is that she let the people grow arrogant and betray the Heavenly Order. And obviously, this puts a whole little back and forth where Pitt's like, no, the real Palutena would never say stuff like this. I trusted you. I fought with you because you were the right side of justice. Yada, yada, yada. I love how, like, in the background, you got Verdi making comments like, oh yeah, here's the world's tiniest violin. Let's hear Pitt complain and cry about this. Now, interestingly, Pitt tries to shut down Veridi, and then out of nowhere pops up Phosphorus, who's like, hey, these are goddesses you're talking to here, Pitt. You should watch your tone. Just straight up reprimanding him for being blasphemous. But of course, despite all three of these women just straight up belittling Pitt and all his thoughts and views, his resolve could not be stronger. The goddess of light has turned dark and he needs to bring it back and he needs to save Skyworld. Even if everybody just thinks he's a little naive boy. In any case, as Pitt fights his way towards the temple, he reminds Veridi that she was telling him about the Chaos Kin. So Veridi says that there is little that's actually known about the Chaos Kin except for this. It takes its victims back to its nest, the Chaos Vortex, and consumes their souls. Disturbingly, it melts them down and slowly chews away at them. And perhaps what's most frightening of all is that the Chaos Kin's ability is that they can control the soul's owner. You can kind of see where this is going, right? Clearly, Palutena is under the control of the Chaos Kin. And, well, she's the one who turned him into a ring. Palutena, under the control of Chaos Kin, turned Pitt into a ring. And so Pitt needs to save her before the Chaos Kin completely consumes her. And as Veridi puts it, do you think he starts at the head or the feet as he nibbles away at her? Wow, Veridi. Just wow. Now as Pitt makes his way throughout Skyworld, it's a bit of a maze-like puzzle where you have to ascend and descend from 2 different floors. All the while, Hades randomly shows up and is like, hey, sorry I'm late, thanks for clearing the path for me. Then, you know, he comes up and he's like, hey, just to kind of clear things up, the Chaos Kin doesn't actually work for me. You know, in case you guys were wondering if I was doing the evil thing. No, I'm doing the other evil thing, not that evil thing. But according to Hades, it seems like that it built up quite the grudge being locked away in the Lunar Sanctum. So Veridi kind of realizes that if she had been there at the time, she could have stopped this, right? Because Arlen was her commander. In fact, you know, she wishes that Arlen was a little bit more vocal about the fact that the Chaos Kin was imprisoned in there and explained the situation better to her. But even for her, she's like, well, you know how tight-lipped that Arlen can get? I didn't know. And like, Veridi keeps trying to reassure Pitt that this is not his fault. Arlen was blocking his way. He needed to take him down. He had no idea the Chaos Kin was going to be set free. Pit should not be too hard on himself, and meanwhile you got Hades in the background who's like, no, this is absolutely Pit's fault. If he wasn't so careless, the Chaos Kin would not be out and about causing a problem even to myself being Hades. And Pit reiterates that he still needs to take down the Chaos Kin, but he's only doing it because it's necessary to save Palutena, not just because he doesn't like its existence. And then finally, after an outdoor segment with an exotank where you gotta use a burst to make the jump, Pit takes on the last guard of Centurions that are blocking the temple, and finally is able to confront Palutena. And when she steps forward and tells Pit, I guess you're here to fight me, he says no. I'm here to save you. And something I really like about his character is he's always trying to make it very clear that his intentions are in the right spot. You can call it a naive justification, but I think it's admirable in his character. Now, it's kind of problematic because Viridi doesn't want you to hurt Palutena, but obviously you also have to defeat her. And Viridi is telling him that just don't focus on her, focus on finding and attacking the Chaos Kin instead. And she states that the Chaos Kin is close by. She can feel it. That's what Pit says, but I thought that the Chaos Kin was like camping out in her brain or something. And what's actually interesting about this fight is that if you do continue to shoot Palutena and you eventually defeat her, you lose a life. You're not supposed to attack Palutena. You're supposed to look above her and attack that little purple cloud of dust that you might not even notice. But in fairness, you do have Viridi telling you to look upwards. It's on top of her. As you shoot the Chaos Kin enough, it'll eventually just like blast out of Palutena and fall on the floor and you get to unload on it. And you just need to make sure you're avoiding shooting Palutena and attacking that at all times. And of course, with enough damage, eventually you will defeat the Chaos Kin, and Lady Palutena will be free of its control. And just as Pit goes to comfort the Goddess of Light, the Chaos Kin blasts right through with its tail and grabs a green orb thing right out of the inside of Palutena, causing the Goddess of Light to turn into stone. And then before anybody could react, it flies off, opens up a chaos vortex, and slips through it. And Pit, without thought, sprints towards the vortex before it closes and demands that Viridi helps him fly right now. Then he jumps into it, but then he bounces right off of it. And just when it seems like all hope is lost, Dark Pit appears out of nowhere and just slams into this little opening for the vortex, causing a giant tear into the door to this vortex before it closes. And mind you, he does this by riding on the lightning chariot, which is totally random, and the chariot starts to fly off, and then Phosphor is like, don't worry, I got this, and Jesus disappears and goes to get the carriage. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there holding my 3DS wondering what the hell is exactly going on. I have so many questions. I still don't understand how the Chaos Kin pulled a green orb out of Lady Palutena and turned her into stone, but also, like, yeah, where did Pit 2 come from? But there's no time to talk about anything. Pit 2 tells Pit that it's time to go and help Palutena now. And Viridi says he's absolutely right, but it's time to reel it in for a second and save your game so you can move on. But we're just gonna swing right into Chapter 21, the Chaos Vortex. Dark Pit is up ahead and we gotta follow him. The Chaos Vortex is, as you'd expect, completely chaotic. It's like flying between dimensions, with the added bonus of completely asinine things like random eyeballs popping up on the screen, which I have to do my obligatory, this looks great when it pops up on the 3DS screen. And it's just like a bizarre flying segment all around, like just shadow hands and limbs just coming into the screen and blocking your way. I mean, from a gameplay perspective, you're still just flying around in a circle and trying to shoot as many enemies as you see, but still, the visuals are kind of insane. There's even a segment where it goes completely dark, and then when you come out of it, Pit is dark until he gets his color back out of nowhere. Even like replicas of the Chaos Kin start to show up and you gotta defeat those as you're flying through. But that also leads to a major question being asked by Viridi and Pit that if this thing is actually replicating itself and these are all equally as strong as the original Chaos Kin, we're in big trouble. Now eventually Viridi points out the correct Chaos Kin, like the original, and that's who they have to chase after immediately. And it just ups the intensity of the situation that was already pretty intense as you fly after it through different dimensions and more eyeballs. And then when Pit chases after it long enough, gives it enough damage, eventually it crash lands. And likewise, Pit follows suit. Now this land segment is just a very long, multiple phase battle. You're not going anywhere, you're staying in the same spot, and you're just facing multiple waves of enemies. It's a challenge. I'd be lying if I said I got through it in one life. And naturally, with every wave, it gets harder. Viridi will kind of help you by giving you hints about how to defeat specific enemies if they're not like standard. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. You just gotta worry about your defenses as you attack. And these enemies are all enemies that we've seen before. The lore here, I guess, in-game is that they're replicas because, you know, you're fighting the forces of nature, the underworld army, but they're not actually belonging to the Chaos Kin. And then after about the 8th or the 9th wave, Dark Pit lands and he starts to help out. So this gives Pit a chance to ask Dark Pit why he's helping him suddenly. And you know, since Dark Pit is an extension of Pit, he tells Pit, he's like, you know, while you were a ring, I was less than nothing. I was unconscious. I was myself. The two of us are connected. If there's no you, there's no me. We are two sides of the same coin. So whether Dark Pit likes it or not, he has to help Pit save Lady Palutena. And so the duo works together to take on the onslaught of enemies. And then finally, we get to the 13th wave. Viridi says she is sure that this is it, this is the end of it. And Dark Pit comes forward and says, it's time for our pre-boss battle rallying cry. He really is an extension of Pit. And so the duo together says, filth of the land, hear our words, and see our actions. I am Pit, the servant of the goddess of light, and I am Dark Pit, the servant to no other but myself. And together, we will rain death upon you. So anyone who wants to die, step right up. And anyone who doesn't want to die, too bad. God, it's so corny. I love that Viridi makes fun of them too. But I mean, considering when you're actually playing the game, this is like the 13th freaking wave of this. I don't know, you can't help but feel the hype at least a little bit. And once the final phase is done, the Chaos Kin is ready for the fight, and Viridi actually helps. She takes away his wings, so now you're fighting against this being that's crawling through the ground. Now, it's still very hard to shoot the Chaos Kin. The thing can be very slippery, to be honest. But there's a trap that Viridi lays out on the floor, so that if you can lure the Chaos Kin towards you and it gets stuck in there, you can easily take some shots at it. Then that makes it a lot easier to finish off the enemy. And as soon as it's defeated, it explodes and that green orb goes and flies right back into the stone Palutena. And so now, the Goddess of Light is saved and back to normal. But there's still no time for a reunion, because just as they are about to embrace, the Chaos Kin, whatever's left of it, quickly goes after and attacks Dark Pit, sending him flying off the edge of the stage. And Pit, without thought, dives right after him to save his life. He quickly asks Viridi for the power of flight, but she's like, yo dude, you already used it up, I got nothing left to give you. Then she tells Pit that if she enables the power of flight right now, his wings will catch fire. But Pit does not care at all. He needs to save Dark Pit. And Viridi's like, that's dumb, I'm just gonna pull you out. And he tells her, no, don't do that, stop. And he continues to dive towards Dark Pit, because he knows that if he doesn't help Dark Pit now, they won't have another chance. And reluctantly, Viridi accepts his request and she gives him wings and tells him whatever happens to you isn't my fault. And Pit, with his flame wings and all, burns right down towards Dark Pit, gets a hold of him, and Viridi pulls the duo back towards them. And when the injured Dark Pit comes through, the first thing he asks is how Light Pit is doing, and Viridi tells him that Pit's in bad shape. Not only can he not fly, his wings are burnt to a crisp, but he's barely breathing. Fortunately, however, there is another goddess next to us, and it's Palutena. You get a glimpse of memories from the earlier part of the game where Pit would tell Palutena that he wished that he could fly one day all by himself, with the camera transitioning over and showing that his wings are just useless now, completely burnt away. And a reminder that Pit wants to return to Skyworld victorious, and here he lays in Skyworld, damaged. Not only him, but Skyworld itself is damaged. And with that, the screen cuts away and we transition straight into Chapter 22, Scorched Feathers. But instead of controlling Pit, we are controlling Dark Pit. Palutena tells him that Pit is still unconscious, and with his wings burnt up, he can't last much longer. But she has thought of a way to save Pit, and she reminds Dark Pit that they both owe a lot to Pit. He saved both of them, making many sacrifices to do so. And Dark Pit completely obliges. He knows, he was there, he's seen it happen. She tells Dark Pit that he needs to go to the City of Souls, which is just a little ways ahead, and this location is the place where souls make their final passage into death, or back into life. And so Viridi chimes in and she's like, are you trying to cheat death? You want to raise the dead, keep the near dead alive? That's pretty dirty business, especially for the Goddess of Light, Palutena. But Palutena says, I know the stakes. We do not have a choice, however. Meanwhile, Dark Pit, who was like absent for 3 years, just pops up and he's like, hey, one sec, weren't you guys like at war with each other? And Viridi's like, yeah, like, mind your own business, dude. Like, a lot has happened, obviously, since you disappeared, and I'm not so petty that I can't extend an olive branch at a time like this. Yeah, Viridi's completely a good guy by this point in the game, obviously. But so is Dark Pit. This is all because of the impacts of Pit's heroic personality. He has that effect on people. Now, in line with her personality, Viridi's like, hey, just so you know, this is not a hug it out moment. But we all know, Viridi. We all know. Now, Dark Pit does pop forward and is like, hey, just, like, not to hurt your feelings, but this Pit doesn't need your help to fly. Like, Dark Pit can actually fly on his own. So Palutena's like, wait a sec, if your flight's unlimited, you don't actually have to battle and land. You can just battle in the air. So, seemingly, we're not going to be landing with Dark Pit. Eventually, you fly into this area that looks like a bunch of crystal caves, and she mentions that it's unlike any earthly city. The spirits of the dead gather in this location. Effectively, they are in the underworld. And so naturally, you got Hades out in the background, who says, hey, our hero's looking a little goth today. I hope the stresses of life haven't gone you down. That would be ever so tragic. Obviously ripping on Dark Pit's black getup. And then Verity pops in and she's like, hey, just anyway, Pit 2, your understanding is correct. The underworld is where souls go, and the Reapers are responsible for carrying those souls. But we've got an excess of souls these days, and therefore the Reapers can't handle them all. So that's why so many of the extra souls just come into this city. It's kind of like a giant waiting room for souls that are waiting to pass away. Now these souls that come here, some of them just fade away, and others, they just get eaten. It's really grim, to be honest. But as far as the stage is concerned, as they mentioned earlier, this whole thing is just going to be a giant flying section. You finish the first half, and after the transition to the second half, you're still up in the air. And actually, what surfaces in the second half of the stage is the soul-eating monster. So this is the thing that ends up eating the souls that don't get carried by the Reapers. Now, it's not actually too hard to take this thing down. It's just like a mid-stage boss. It's not even really a boss fight. You just shoot it while you're flying. And in the background, you got Hades, who's just kind of like, let it eat as many souls as it wants, and souls don't really mean much. They're the same thing as like skin and bone. And Verity is disgusted by all this, obviously, not only because it's gross, but also because, like, yeah, Hades has no regard for anything that's living. And that obviously bothers her because she's like the goddess of nature. And it just creates more and more of those existential conversations that happen all throughout this game. Now, typically, Hades, when he grabs these souls, he molds them into other forms. So Verity asks, like, do you think Hades was serious about that when he says that he can mold them? And Palutena mentions that it actually explains the endless supply of troops that he has. He's making them out of souls. So he's coming into this area over here, he's grabbing all of these people that are dying in the battles that are going on Earth, and he's making more of his troops. And as you'd expect, as Verity points out right now, that gives the Underworld Army a near endless supply of forces. There's no way that the Underworld Army could ever lose. And they even break it down for you in a fun little animation. All the lives lost in battle go to the building up to the Underworld Army. Therefore, the more fighting there is, the bigger his army gets. And it's a circle, right? Because the bigger his army gets, the more fighting there is. I love how he just straight up says it. He's like, oh, it feels so wonderful to be on the winning team of all this. Now, Darkbit decides to chime in, and he's like, hey, I think your math is a bit off. And I love the reply here, especially because this is a 3DS title, but he's like, you might want to break out the brain age, pal. Causing Verity to jump in and be like, I have a brain age of 24. Anyway, the fourth wall stuff is fun. So Darkbit says, think about all of the casualties that have been in this war between the gods. If Hades was right, the underworld would be way more crowded with monsters. Therefore, that means that one fallen soldier does not equal one new underworld monster. In actuality, every monster requires a ton of souls, which, as Verity points out, is an absolute abomination and might actually be the sickest thing that she's ever heard. So it really just kind of lends to the severity of the situation and how evil Hades has been. He's using tons of souls that die on Earth to create just a single one of his underworld minions. So it's time to focus, and Darkpit says it's been great touring the City of Souls and all, but we're here to save Pit. Eventually they make it over to this giant object, and Palutena says that this was once a stream of souls, but so many lives have been lost that it's now a torrent. These souls need to find their final resting place down here so that life can spring anew. And that's supposed to be part of the natural cycle of life, but Hades keeps playing with souls. His bloodlust has thrown everything off balance. And Verity chimes in and she's like, hey, it's like humans. They disrupt the balance on Earth. It's unforgivable. But then Darkbit pops up and he's like, no, it's all of you gods and your stupid wars that are the ones throwing everything off balance, not the humans. Then Palutena's like, you know, he might be onto something because we have the Underworld Army out to hoard souls after all. Meanwhile, the forces of nature are trying to wipe out humanity. And then you got the humans who are continuing to exploit nature and each other. And then you have us, the gods, who drag the entire world into our power struggles. But it doesn't matter how this all started. Now we know who's profiting from it. Hades, left unchecked, and he threatens us all. So the only option left is to take him down. But in order to do that, they're going to need Pit's help, so they gotta get him patched up. So eventually Dark Pit makes it to what's known as the Rewind Spring, and the Rewind Spring can return things to their original states. But if you soak in it for too long, it'll rewind things too far, and that could get weird. Now if you recall, Dark Pit, earlier in the game, absorbed Pandora. So when he drops down into Rewind Spring, guess who's back again? The boss fight now is against Pandora, only this time, she's red. And the Goddess of Calamity says that you can thank Dark Pit for bringing me to the Rewind Spring, and that's why I'm back. Of course, Pandora hates Dark Pit because he basically caused her demise. He was a rebellious servant, though it seems he still served my purposes in the end. And then after the first phase of the battle, she drops down into the Rewind Spring, and then comes out as a beautiful goddess, apparently, which obviously confuses everybody because she used to be an ugly blob. And the Goddess of Calamity chuckles because she's like, oh, it's been so long since I've had a body. Eat your hearts out, ladies. And Verity laughs. She's like, oh, someone is clearly overcompensating. Of course, now, like, Palutena has to jump in, and she's like, what, are you feeling a little inadequate, Verity? Then, there's like a whole discussion here about beauty standards and how she used to be an evil blob, and now she just still is an evil blob underneath, but it just has better hair. All the while, Dark Pit's taking on this boss fight against what's known as the Amazon Pandora, who's like straight up launching bombs at him for some reason. But eventually, once Dark Pit defeats her, Verity tells Dark Pit to grab Pit, and he only needs to slightly dip him into the rewind spring. And sure enough, with a slight dip into the spring, Pit gets his wings back. He regains consciousness, full of energy. He asks Dark Pit where he is, and Dark Pit, who apparently has to run away from his feelings, immediately jumps off the cliff and forgets that he can't fly. Right, he lost Pandora's powers. And so Verity reels him back in. And then finally, the duo of Palutena and Pit reunite. Celebrations all around, and it's time to go home. Or rather, to chapter 23, the Lord of the Underworld. It's finally time for Pit to square off against Hades. And Pit's ready. He says he is carbo loaded and everything. And Palutena takes this chance to kind of fill Pit in on everything. She says Hades has overstepped his boundaries by exploding and desecrating souls. He's disrupted the balance between the earth, the heavens, and the underworld. He must be stopped. You must stop him. Sounds like a tall order, but if anybody can do it, Palutena has faith that it can be Pit. And so Pit once again makes his way flying through the underworld, while being alert because they have to find exactly where Hades is. Since he doesn't actually have to have a physical castle, he can be anywhere in the underworld, and Palutena says that she senses his presence around him, she just doesn't know where he is. And then right on cue, you slam right into his face. There's a fun back and forth between the two of them. Pit, Hades, Pit, Hades, Pit, Hades. And right after that, the first encounter is on. Now Pit here is once again equipped with his 3 sacred treasures, the same 3 sacred treasures that he used earlier to defeat Medusa. And so Hades, with what as I can only describe as a massive falcon punch, knocks the hell out of Pit and completely disables the 3 sacred weapons. Now during this whole segment of the fight, you kind of have to dodge his punches in the air while shooting away at his eyes. After he gets enough hits, eventually he'll cover his eye because he's in pain, and then you start the next phase. And hell suck you in. Yeah, they just straight up inhales you. And now, in the ground segment, we are inside Hades. Starting off what seems to be his mouth, and it looks like you're on his tongue, and you're shooting away at enemies that are around you. Pretty unique visuals here. You're taking down these blobs of jelly that are blocking your way, and just working your way through the biology of the Lord of the Underworld, who clearly has either eaten his forces or they just reside inside him at all times. I don't know how this is exactly working here, but it's another stage. Now, the whole thing is pretty linear. Its insides kind of resemble the inside of a cave, and there's still lava in there. Most of the bad guys and the objects and obstacles have this weird little jelly membrane around it just to indicate that you're inside his body. It's really gross, and Pit has no contact with Palutena. And he's like, oh, she would be totally grossed out by this. But Hades points out that he won't be able to communicate with Palutena because he has a stomach made of steel, and I guess the Wi-Fi isn't strong enough to go through the walls. So, as Hades points out, Pit's on his own, and he has to figure out how to do it without her thinking for him. And so Hades asks him a question. A simple question, since there's no Palutena to help him out. Why exactly are you trying to defeat me, he says. And Pit states that we are all responsible for maintaining a certain order in the universe. As the Lord of the Underworld, you know this better than anyone else. But your greed has thrown everything out of order. You've overstepped your bounds by exploiting and desecrating souls. Yeah, honestly, it sounds like he just wrote down what Palutena stated earlier. You've disrupted the balance between the earth, the heavens, and the underworld. Then even Hades pops up and he's like, I'm impressed by all the big words you used, but I didn't ask you for a sermon. Did you come up with that all by yourself, or did you have some divine inspiration? Yeah, of course, Hades knows these are not Pit's words. It sounds just like Palutena. In any case, making your way through the body of Hades can be quite a challenge. Pit does try to kind of motivate himself as he's getting through it by mimicking Palutena and answering for her and saying what he would expect her to say. Of course, with his own little Pit spin on it. And then, I don't know, seems like he's in the lungs or something because there's arteries and veins going everywhere and they're treated as rail grinds. And then there's this giant long tunnel with a rail that eventually takes you to this stage, final destination situation. And then you just start to take on an onslaught of enemies, one after the other, while Hades remarks about how he's going to miss Pit when he's gone. And then, in their little back and forth, everything's just kind of reiterated that Hades has no regard for life and doesn't care much about humans, and Pit's like, how could you say that? You're a god, blah, blah, blah. We've heard this all over and over again throughout the game. Then anyway, as this all goes on, eventually Hades tells Pit that, unfortunately for you, there's only one way out. And of course, Pit's like, ew, no, please, no, no, no. And Hades says, hey, cheer up. You've been privy to a side of me that no one else has ever seen. my insides. And now you'll be privy to the inside of a privy too. Toodaloo. That's what this game was missing all along, toilet humor. But once you do finally finish off the enemies in that room, this sphincter opens up, and you're running through what I hope is not the large intestine. But seemingly not, because eventually Hades does mention that Verity is causing some problems. She showed up now, so Hades has to deal with her. In the meantime, Pit finishes off the stage and makes it into a room where it's just him face to face with Hades' heart. Now, the way this fight goes is that there are two hearts, I guess, and they're running through this maze, and if you shoot one long enough, it'll eventually just start charging in circles and head towards you, and it can take a lot of damage if it hits you. So you want to keep your distance and try to shoot it from far away, and then also, like, you have to stay out of the lanes that it's in, because once it explodes, it has like a Bomberman effect where everything that is either in front, behind, or left or right of it will take a lot of damage as well. This fight is more difficult than you'd expect, to be honest. I mean, once you know what's going on, it gets a lot easier, but I did lose a few lives trying to figure that out. I was like too focused on trying to stay close to the enemy instead of trying to keep my distance. And like technically only one of these is the real heart, but you don't really know that, you're trying to shoot both of them. Anyway, I did eventually manage to defeat the hearts even though I had one hit remaining. And then like once the heart explodes, you blast straight out of Hades' chest. So I guess earlier we never got to the large intestine, fortunately. And the lightning chariot immediately shows up to carry Pit to safety, with Dark Pit holding the reins of the chariot. So for now at least, Pit is safe, while off in the distance we see Hades, who has heartburn. He tries to make one final swipe at the pits, but Palutena pulls him away before it's too late. And the final line of the chapter is Hades saying that hurt a lot, but at least I'm not dead. And of course he isn't. There's still 2 more chapters. So now we head to chapter 24, which is titled The Three Trials. As you know, every Greek story has to have some form of a trial segment. So Palutena comes forward and is like, yo, like, given the current circumstances, I actually don't see how we can defeat Hades. Not head on anyway. So she suggests that they go and meet Dintos. Dintos is the god of the forge. He made the 3 sacred treasures. He creates all weapons, even the sad little ones that you're using now. And since Hades destroyed the 3 sacred treasures, Palutena is hopeful that Dintos will create a new weapon for him. Now, as they fly towards him, Pit points out, and Palutena, that there are, all 3 of the forces attacking them right now. The underworld, the forces of nature, and the Arum, which seems odd. But before they can elaborate on that, eventually Dintos appears, and he says hello to Palutena and her little helper. And, being a god himself, Dintos obviously knows why they're here. He says, you want to slay Hades and you want to protect the celestial balance. So he tells Palutena, well, if you can make it all the way to me, and you can pass his 3 trials, he will lend a hand. And they make it to his forge, and they start to fight all the enemies, and, Dintos says that he's made all of these enemies. They are superior to the originals, actually, which is in line with this difficulty spike that we're facing in this penultimate stage. But Dintos makes it very clear that if you expect to take on Hades and defeat him, you're gonna have to do better than this. And Dintos reiterates his promise that if Pit is able to pass all 3 of his trials, he will make him a weapon that can defeat Hades. So Pit could not be more focused. And like this whole segment where you're just flying straight and just facing attack after attack does get intense. Yeah, I lost a few lives here, I'm not gonna lie. But once you do finally make it to the end of it, you get to land. And Dintos is laying down relaxing up ahead. It's time for the 3 trials. So you go up a little elevator and you get this stairwell in the sky that's seemingly taking you towards nowhere. As you advance up the stairs, you defeat certain enemies along the way, there's a locked door eventually, and once you destroy that door, you enter a room, and it's a repeat boss fight against the Phoenix. It's a bit harder, there are some different attacks in there, but for the most part, you should be able to get through it. Once that's all said and done, you can move upwards to the next area. Same idea, defeat all the enemies, eventually you will open a door, and it's a repeat boss fight against the Kragalanch. Once again, he's a bit harder. After that, the whole platform moving upwards thing happens again, and that's a bit harder. Knock all that out of the way and enter the room, and it's the Kraken again. Once you finish off the Galactic Fiend, you learn that this was all just the first trial. And now, you get to the next round. It's a fight against Magnus and Gal. And it's funny because it seems like this is the real Magnus. Like, Pit's like, what are you doing here? And Magnus is like, well, what can I say? The old god asked me to fight you, so here I am. And this time, instead of you teaming up with Magnus, it's you fighting against Magnus teaming up with Gal. And Pit even, is trying to reassure it. He's like, hey, are you actually Magnus, or are you just a creation? And Dintos pops forward and is like, hey, just FYI, I invited these 2 here to help test you, and they agreed. Now, once you defeat them, you're not actually done, because now you're fighting against Lady Palutena. And, after you defeat her and you think it's the real one and this is the trial, she completely transformed into something terrifying. I like the backwards P on her forehead, it kind of gives me Waluigi vibes. But she's known as Pseudo Palutena. And once you take her down, which is a lot more difficult, you do get to head towards the final trial. And so Dintos shows Pit what's going to be his final reward. This great sacred treasure. Pit is going to have to defeat it if he wants to have it. This fight ain't easy, by the way. This thing is a beast. Like, one massive attack and I immediately lost a life. Definitely gonna have to worry about your defenses during this one. Even like Palutena gets up there. She's like, yo, like, aren't you worried how strong this thing is? What if it gets in the wrong hands? And Dintos replies, is like, yeah, that's why I'm testing out Pit. I want to make sure I'm putting it in somebody that I can trust. Dintos needs to know that Pit has the skill and the heart to operate the great sacred treasure. And of course he does. After enough attacks, eventually the thing will go down, and Pit gets to ride the great sacred treasure. But I like that Palutena just kind of says what we're all thinking. She's like, hey, Dintos, like, you know, you said 3 trials. That was quite a few enemies for just 3 trials, wouldn't you agree? And Dintos laughs and remarks that he may have thrown in a few freebies. And so we head towards the final chapter. Pit jumps down and activates the great sacred treasure, and heads out for the war's end. Spirits are high, both for Palutena and for Pit. Viridi pops back into the picture and she tells Pit, hey, I hope you didn't get too lonely without me, because there is no way that I'd miss the Battle of Battles. I made popcorn and everything for this. And shortly after that, we run into the Lord of the Underworld again. They do their whole Pit, Hades, Pit, Hades, Pit, Hades thing back and forth one more time. And the next fight begins. Hades seems to be at least somewhat impressed by Pit's new shiny toy, and in this giant boss fight, Hades will unload just multiple projectiles towards you that you need to take down before they hit you. All the while, you need to continue shooting towards Hades until he eventually transforms into a giant twister. And he's gonna keep just like spinning towards you where you gotta dodge to the edge of the screen to avoid his hits. And then eventually he'll just get frustrated and start charging head-on towards Pit. So then now, obviously, you have to avoid all of his oncoming attacks while still shooting at him, which it's so fast-paced, it's obviously easier said than done. Like, I basically lost almost the entirety of my health going through that phase, but after enough hits, the charge from Hades will stop. And in the next segment, he'll do like a drop kick, send you flying backwards. And this time, Hades is like, oh, let me see if you can keep up, and just starts sprinting the other way. So now, the Great Sacred Treasure transports into pursuit mode. And basically, the way that this is all going now, as far from a gameplay angle, is that you are just kind of hovering to the side of Hades and trying to shoot every one of these little, I don't know, weak points that he has. At the same time, like, these little targets are firing towards you and you have to shoot them down before they hit you. Meanwhile, Pit's like, why are you running away in the middle of our final battle? And he's like, oh, I was just going to make a quick stop and decimate a country or two. Then Viridi chimes in and she's like, he's probably trying to, like, you know, recruit more souls while this is all happening. And Hades laughs and is like, yeah, I wanted to greet Pity on top of a mountain of corpses. Even in the midst of battle, this dude has no regard for life. And he's actually disappointed because he's like, Pit has like this super fast vehicle that he couldn't even get started on building a pile of corpses if he wanted to. Now, as far as you're concerned, while you're playing through all of this and trying to keep up with the plot, still need to go through shooting all of these like pimples, I guess, that are sticking out of his body, and then once you defeat all of those, faces will start to surface from the back of Hades. But they are not just faces, they are also guns. And they're actually all just replicas of Hades' face. So you now basically need to shoot down all of these faces before the faces shoot you. And these even like these vortexes that stick out, it's the same idea. You need to destroy them before they destroy you. Now, destroying them will actually trigger Hades. He feels pain, so you know you're getting somewhere. And he unloads a massive attack onto Pit. And Pit says that the Great Sacred Treasure is falling apart. But no, it's actually just transforming into mech armor mode. And Hades is actually starting to get frustrated by this. Now, fortunately for Hades, he's covered, as Viridi puts it, from head to toe in weaponry. He's like a rainbow apocalypse. And Hades refers to this getup as his Devastation Ensemble, wearing it only for very special occasions. You know, like weddings and Armageddons. And of course, as far as Pit is concerned, it's the same idea, just new things will pop up and you gotta keep shooting those before they hit you. Eventually, a part of Hades' chest will be exposed and you need to shoot that. And after you give him enough damage, suddenly Hades will reach out and he will grab Pit, and using a drill that's just like popping right out of his body, he will try to drill straight through Pit's armor. Or, you know, as the creative Hades puts it, he's gonna drill through the rind to remove the Pit. And Pit manages to slip away, unloading a massive attack on the Lord of the Underworld. And now Pit's got some mojo, telling Hades that he is not half the villain that he thought he was. But to Pit's surprise, that still did not finish off Hades. And as Hades once again slips away, Pit has to engage Ultra Light Mode. And he gets above ground, he finds the giant Hades waiting for him, who quickly powers up and spawns some very nice legs. Seriously, look at the calf muscles on these bad boys. And now he starts to fire off like these blue shots towards Pit, and Pit once again has to shoot them before they hit him. But he also has to avoid the purple ones that are being shot at him, which is like a lot easier said than done because you're firing away, all the while dodging everything that's coming at you. In between all that, every now and then he'll shoot out like square things that you also have to dodge and avoid the one that's shooting you. And then finally, after so many hits, Hades will pop up and say, "This is ever so tiresome." And so Pit tries to finish everything off, and then suddenly he disappears. Hades, he's gone. But then he quickly slams down from overhead and knocks Pit down, completely destroying the sacred treasure that was surrounding Pit, and Pit is just corralling down towards the land. He's unconscious. Verity's screaming to wake him up, and it's just not working. All that we can do is make sure that Pit lands over on the land that's beneath him, and then Hades drops down right in front of him, ready to leash an ultimate attack to end everything. What he calls his deadliest attack. Now, as he's charging up, Pit's trying to use his shield, and the reticle that's on the screen is broken, let alone his weapons. And Palutena states that she feels an outside force, a godlike force, and it's gathering power, but she doesn't know if it's a friend or a foe. But whatever it is, it seems to be targeting Hades. And so Palutena wants you to guide it towards Hades, and you do so by keeping your reticle, your broken reticle, aimed at Hades for as long as possible. And in doing so, an epic uppercut will almost take Hades' head clean off. And it's from none other than frickin' Medusa. Palutena quickly asks, like, "We defeated you, why are you helping us?" And she says it very clearly, it's because Hades keeps reviving her, but she will not play puppet to him anymore. Now, Hades, headless Hades, tells Medusa that he is her master and he will revive her as many times as he desires. But, now with his phantom blue head that he has, he tells her that she's worn out her usefulness. And he completely obliterates her with an uppercut of his own. And before anybody could even react, Verity's like, "Yo, Pit, you need to fly now." And she activates the power of flight for him. Now Pit picks up the cannon from the great treasure, because that's really all that's remaining that he can get a hold of. And Palutena tells him that she has a plan. He just needs to tough it out for a little bit longer. She's using her powers to charge up the gun of the great sacred treasure. And once it's fully charged, it's time for Pit to let loose. So you're basically playing dodge the laser beams while you charge up the special beam cannon for Piccolo. Now, it doesn't actually take too long, and it's not all that hard to dodge the incoming laser beams, but in the meantime, it gives Pit one final chance to do his thing. He steps up and says, "I fight for all creatures, living and breathing. I fight for all departed souls still hanging in limbo. But most of all, I fight for Lady Palutena, the goddess of light. And it's in all their names that I will crush you, Lord of the Underworld. I won't let you desecrate another soul." And that's it. Hades is taken care of. The townspeople cheer. Verity is back talking about how humans are actually a problem. The credits begin to play. Celebrations are all around us. And Pit explains to Verity why is it that he loves humans so much, and it's because they have heart. And I resonate with this closing statement so much, because as I close off on yet another retrospective video that lasted way too long, heart is like the biggest thing that I can think of for how this whole experience was. The amount of passion and effort that went into this title, it should never be unnoticed. The attention to detail that was given into the controls, like this is supposed to be a simple rail shooter, and somehow its control style is more in depth to not only games from its time, but games in the current generation. It's a handheld title on the 3DS with an epic story that covers so many different lines of life that are still relevant to today, about who and what is considered valuable and what isn't, what it means to be right, what it means to be wrong, what it means to be fooled, and what it means to be confident. They didn't need to go this hard on the story. Most of the story happens in the background when you're not even paying attention, and yet there's still so much love and care and heart put into it. On the surface, what seems to be a simple story about a boy who can't fly because I guess he flew too close to the sun, they end up taking this character who's based off of Icarus, right? It's the name of the game, Kid Icarus. And the lesson of his story about not being overconfident and flying too close to the sun. And they showed that even with his wings cut off, he could still find a way to be a hero, still find a way to save the world. He still finds a way to fly. And look, I draw many parallels between the way that Pit behaves as well as the passion behind the designers of this game. Maybe Sakurai did decide to fly a little too close to the sun with this simple rail shooter that he was designing. But there's a damn good reason as to why this game still has a cult following. It may turn a lot of people away before they even get a hand on it. It may even turn some people away when they do get a hand on it. But those who do get a hold of the game and they go through the story and they go through the adventure and they just perfect it one after the other, find all the collectibles, master the stages even at the highest of difficulties, it's evident without a doubt to every one of those individuals just how much of a treat this game is. And it's the same heart that we see put into this game, this passion project, that we see on the sleeve of Pit all through the adventure. Like, I knew I loved this game. I knew I liked it on the 3DS, and I knew I liked it even more when I got the Steam controller. What I was completely blindsided by this time around, because it had been so many years since I had played it, was how much more I loved and felt a connection to the story and the characters. And it's a very big reason why I just spent 2 hours recounting the tale of Pit, the naive hero of Kid Icarus Uprising. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed this adventure, because there will be certainly more to come just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.